I'm a 14-year-old girl, but when I moved into this house, I had just turned 12. The house was fine, and was very quiet since before this I had lived with a ton of family, but now there were only 4 of us. We moved in the day after Thanksgiving, and it felt great to have my own room that I didn't have to share with any cousins or siblings, so I spent a lot of time up there basking in my newfound alone space. Let me emphasize this. When we moved in, I felt nothing. No presence, no spirits, nothing paranormal, nothing off. That is, until December rolled around. The first week of December is when I felt it for the first time, like I was being watched by something. Like when someone stares at you in public, and you have that instinct to look at them, that's how it felt. I always felt watched in my room, to the point that I hated being alone up there, and spent all my time in the living room or in my parents' or brother's room. The first week goes by, and I try to ignore the feeling. I chalked it up to me being paranoid because it was a new house, but still, the thought stayed in the back of my mind. Finally, I told someone who may have answers for me, my aunt. She's my mom's sister, and she has always believed in the paranormal for as long as I can remember. She got me into it for a while before I stopped believing. I believe again now, because this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. She explained that it was probably a nice spirit watching over the house and, hopefully, me. I hoped that was the case, and in a way, it was. Over time, I would feel it any time I entered my room, and especially when I was trying to fall asleep. It creeped me out so much, and I just wished that it would go away. Then it went from watching me to making contact. One night I was home alone because my brother and parents were visiting Santa, and I didn't want to go that year because I felt sick. I was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when I felt breathing on the back of my neck. It was hot and made my hair stand up. I froze in fear and stood there until the microwave went off. When it began to beep, the breathing faded away as if whatever were there had just walked off. I made the hot chocolate and sat on the couch. I was so freaked out that I was just there staring at the TV in shock until my family got home. Worst part is that I could still feel something staring at me, and this time, it wasn't in my room. Finally, the week of Christmas came, and the excitement made me forget about the incident prior until it happened again. Me and my mom were hanging out in the kitchen when she turned around to answer a question that my brother had asked her. I felt the hot breathing on my neck, and this time it stayed there longer. I froze again, unsure of what to do. I panicked and got up and went over by my mom, who was very confused. After that, I felt the breathing constantly, even on Christmas while opening gifts. It lingered. I finally got fed up one day while sitting in my room. It became less scary and more annoying. I said something along the lines of, "Stop breathing on me," and it stopped completely, and I was shocked. I didn't think it would actually work. After that, I began to have the same dream, but slightly different, every single night. It would begin with me at some park that I've never seen in my life, and me and this boy sat on a bench together. We would begin to talk, and it was actually quite peaceful. We would just converse and stare around at the people walking by. He had brown hair and brown eyes, and was really tall compared to me. I'm about 5'4", and he was like 6 feet. The dream would end, and I would never remember anything we talked about, just that it was a good dream. Flash forward to right after Christmas break, a friend, let's call her Danielle, came over to spend the night. We both heavily believed in the paranormal, and she decided because of this whole watching and breathing thing that she would bring her Ouija board. I had always heard different things about them, but decided it was worth a try. We began talking to the thing that watched me, and the reason I knew this is because it always had this very specific energy. I knew it because, like I've said this whole time, he was up my butt. We first asked what his name was, and he replied, Nolan. I was pretty shocked that the board actually worked, and I was pretty mesmerized. I then asked if he was the boy that I talked to in my dreams, and again, he said yes. I was pretty happy that he was nice, because before, I was quite terrified that he was a demon that wanted to eat my bones, but was relieved when it was just a 15-year-old boy. He then said he doesn't like summer and prefers winter, which explains the only appearance being during winter months. Cut to next December, the watching and breathing had stopped during March through November until it began again, only this time, stronger. He began screwing with me. He would open cupboards that I had just closed, or move things that I put in specific areas, only to find them in strange places far from their original area. I always knew that this was Nolan, who I had begun to call Noel. Time went on and the dreams became more vivid, and I remembered the conversations that we had, and it was still nice. Nolan became a good friend, even though I couldn't see him. That December came and went, and now we cut to this year. This is where I wish that Nolan never existed. So because of financial issues and other problems, my dad's family had to move in, my grandparents, aunt, and cousin. And me and that cousin were never super close. I'll call him Connor. Connor was super annoying. He always made messes that he never cleaned up. He never did chores, never did or went to school, and would do stupid stuff for attention, yet he always got what he wanted. By now, I'm 14 and Connor is 12. December rolls around and I'm excited to talk to Nolan. Me and Danielle are still friends and do weekend Ouija sessions with him. So we're home alone, me, Connor, and Danielle, and we decide to introduce Connor to Nolan. So we set up the candles and everything and begin. Things are going smoothly, until Connor starts calling Nolan names. He was saying some pretty mean stuff too. Me and Danielle were trying to get him to stop, but nothing was working until Nolan got really, really mad. Doors began slamming open and shut. Cupboards were going nuts. Our TV was flickering channels and the windows sounded like someone was beating on them. Finally, I looked into the doorway to the hall, where everyone's rooms were besides mine, and there was a tall figure standing there, not moving, as everything went haywire. I screamed and said goodbye, standing up. Danielle was yelling for Nolan to stop, and Connor had begun to cry. Finally, I screamed for him to stop, that he was scaring me, and the figure disappeared, and the cupboards shut along with the doors. The banging stopped, and I just sat on the floor sobbing. Danielle wasn't crying, but I was terrified and just stood there silently. Connor didn't say anything either, but continued staring at the floor with tears in his eyes. Finally, our parents got home, and me and Danielle went to my room while Connor went back to the basement where he stayed with my aunt and grandpa. Danielle had fallen asleep, but I couldn't, so I began talking out loud as I felt Nolan was in the room. I started saying how it wasn't okay that he had really scared me, and I felt the breathing on my neck. Finally, I fell asleep, and things were fine. I dreamt about him again, and all was normal. About a week after that, Connor wanted to talk to Nolan again. Apparently, Nolan was giving him nightmares. Ones where he was chasing him throughout our house, trying to kill him. Nolan would scream about how Connor needed to leave me alone and stop bothering me, or he would kill him. Connor was obviously terrified, and wanted to say sorry, I guess. I'm not sure, but me and him sat down with Danielle's board, which she had left the week prior, and we began to talk with him. Nolan kept spelling out things like murder, angry, and my name over and over again. Our candles went out and knocking began on the window behind me. It went very slow at first, just a simple knock, knock, knock. Me and Connor froze. I couldn't move and I didn't want to turn around. Finally, I told Nolan that I was scared and that he needed to leave Connor alone and stop. The knocking stopped, and the board spelled out, sorry. Then, Connor bad. After that, Connor decided to call it quits and go to bed. I decided to go into my room and try to talk to Nolan again. I started by being nice and asking him to knock once for yes, two for no, something that we usually did. But he got angry fast. He started to bang on my walls at the mention of Connor. My lights went out, and so did my TV. The banging was loud, and if I'm honest, it was terrifying. He was throwing my pillows and banging on my windows, like the night that Danielle was here. I was crying so hard that I could barely breathe and was hyperventilating and sobbing so hard that I could barely talk. Nolan stopped after I let out a strangled cry for him to leave me alone. After that, he stayed away, for a day at least. The next day I woke up, and the Ouija board sat in the middle of my room. I kicked it hard and walked downstairs. I was eating at the kitchen table talking to Connor about the night before. He said he had another dream about Nolan, except it wasn't a nightmare. It was exactly like mine in the park. They talked. I'm still confused about why Nolan would do this. I felt breathing on my neck while eating and basically told Nolan to screw off. I was still mad at him from last night. He did pretty quickly. I didn't feel him for a while, until last night, when Danielle came over for a sleepover and I decided to talk to Nolan. He obviously wanted to talk, so he set up in my room, and he came through faster than I've ever seen. Now what happened next is what I really need some answers for. We began talking and he spelt out sorry, but then he did something I've never seen him do. He spelt out love, and I honestly don't know what that means. He would emphasize it, and barely answer any questions after that. Danielle then made the mistake of bringing up Connor. Nolan got pretty mad, and started to bang on the walls again. I yelled at him to stop, and he did. I didn't say anything after that. Today I called my aunt for advice. She said he may just be an overprotective spirit, but I'm not sure if that's the case here. I don't know if Nolan is bad or not. He isn't to me, but he is to Connor and sometimes even Danielle, but never to me. All I know is that I won't be talking to Nolan for a while, a really long while. And even now, while typing this out, I can feel his breath on the back of my neck. I totally forgot about this happening until my mom brought it up at dinner tonight, and now it's 9:30 at night and I'm scared all over again. This was back in high school, either my freshman or sophomore year. I missed the bus, and I didn't have a car at the time, so my mom had to drive me to school. The road my tiny neighborhood, more like a glorified cul-de-sac, was off of was a long stretch that had only one equally tiny other neighborhood and a few houses here and there. It was 6 a.m. or something and still dark outside, and it was colder than a witch's tit. As we were pulling out of the neighborhood, my mom and I both saw these 3 children in blue and white private school uniforms standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder at the entrance of the neighborhood on the sidewalk. It was either 2 girls and 1 boy or 2 boys and 1 girl. I didn't remember the ratio, but the girls wore a blue and white skirt/dress outfit and the boy wore a blue short-sleeved shirt with khaki shorts. This was weird for a few reasons. 1, it was 40 degrees outside. They looked like they were dressed for the summer, and they didn't even wear coats or anything. Secondly, there were 2 schools in the area, but not a private school till the next town over, and the blue and white weren't the school's uniform colors. Third, what young kids just stand there in a single file line not doing anything but staring? No joshing around, no nothing? Yeah, right. Lastly, this wasn't where the bus stop was. It was a few blocks down. Just a sprinkle of extra creepy on top. There weren't any streetlights. They were just standing there in the dark, not doing jack except for being creepy as hell. They were on the corner on the right, closest to the passenger side where I was obviously sitting. And of course, we were turning right. As we got closer, I thought that at first they didn't have faces, but it was just too shadowy and dark out, and the headlights only shone under their shoulders, which is how I can remember the outfits so vividly. Then we got closer, and I was relieved to see that they did have faces, but then got completely freaked all over again when I saw that their eyes were all black. Like supernatural Sam and Dean fighting demons, all black. My mom saw it before I did, and she put the pedal to the metal and hightailed it out of there. I remember trying to look back and see them, but I couldn't since it was too dark. My mom didn't go back home until the sun rose, and it was bright enough to not be afraid anymore. Of course, no one believed me at school, and my siblings thought we were just full of it, but we know what we saw. We never saw them again after that, though. I thought that they were spirits, but after a few months, I heard about the black-eyed children on YouTube, or something that made the connection. We moved shortly after that due to unrelated reasons. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and I had blissfully forgotten all about it until my mom said, "Hey, remember when?" And now I want to die. I hope that my irrational anxieties and fear around children that are small enough for me to punt across a soccer field is amusing at least. It was in June of 1972 that my mom and dad told me they were taking a couple of our thoroughbred racehorses to Durango, Colorado, where my father owned land, and where we typically boarded some of the animals during the summer. This trip was nothing unusual, as it occurred rather frequently. The only difference this time was that my mother was going with my dad instead of me. I guess Dad figured that at 13, I was old enough and responsible enough to do the morning and evening chores, which consisted of feeding and watering the remaining horses, which numbered about 8. A few cows, 6 pigs, and a coop full of chickens. There were also always a few wounds that needed to be smeared with ointment. These chores were not exactly rocket science, but it did take a while, so I was glad when Lyle offered to come and help me with each evening. He got a kick out of it, as he enjoyed that kind of thing. I, however, leaned more towards the arts, performing magic, singing, playing the piano, and even doing ventriloquism. In fact, I did it professionally by the time I was 12. I had no intention of staying at the house alone while my parents were gone to Colorado. I was very much afraid of the dark, and especially of being alone. It would be years until I discovered why. I was going to spend the weekend with 2 of my best friends, Lyle and Mark Harper. Lyle was a year older than I was, and Mark was a year younger, so I fit right into the middle of the 2. They lived just 3 houses to the west of my house. I can't really call it a house that I lived in. It was one of 4 duplexes that my dad owned. 2 of them were built back in the early 1920s, and the other 2 were newer, as they were built by my dad a couple of years after we moved there in the late 1960s. The 2 old units, A and B, and the 2 new units, C and D, were split down the middle by our long asphalt driveway. The only other building on the property was a very old and very large white stucco garage/shop, which was located behind the units at the end of the driveway. Beyond that old shop was where the corrals and pastures were. With my parents in Colorado, I was in charge of keeping all the animals fed. Darkness was just around the corner, so I took Lyle and we headed to my place. As we entered my driveway, we started walking between the old units and the new units toward the big garage. What made this shop unique were the giant rolling stainless steel doors, one on the left and one on the right, that met in the middle. It created an almost mirror effect, but not quite shiny enough to be an actual mirror. I happened to be looking at the door, noticing how the street light created just enough glow to make our stretched shadows lightly appear on the big metal doors. I commented to Lyle that I wished I was that tall in real life, and that is when it happened. With both of us looking at our very light shadows bouncing to the rhythm of our steps, another shadow, only very dark, no, black. So black that it looked like a thick, inky, one-dimensional entity, ran clumsily across the shiny door from left to right. It was wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed fedora hat. It had a troll-like appearance, all hunched over as though it didn't want to be seen. It scurried quickly in total darkness until it reached the right side of the doors, after which it completely disappeared. We both stopped, frozen in our tracks, trying to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Before either of us could say anything, the thick, dark shadow man trotted back the other direction, once again disappearing as it reached the other side of the doors. Both of our minds instantly realized that nothing solid had run between us and the doors, and that the only way a shadow could be that dark was, well, there was just no way a regular shadow could be that dark. Without uttering a word, we both turned in sync, as though the movement was choreographed, and took off running back onto 8th Avenue. Neither of us stopped until we arrived back at the safety of Lyle's house. Once inside, we ran to his father, Lloyd, who was watching the news on television, and told him that we needed him. We related our experience, and he said that he was sure that there was a logical explanation. I knew, though, that there was not. He walked back to my house with us, and we began to experiment, attempting to recreate a shadow that was as dark as what we had just seen 10 minutes before. It just wasn't possible. Mr. Harper agreed to stay with us while I did my chores in the now dark back pasture area. It would be years later that I would learn about shadow figures and how they operate. Since then, I have been blessed, or cursed, with several paranormal experiences, from full-body apparitions to simply feeling the presence of spirits. I'm not sure why me, but I am grateful. I have had 2 premonitions up to now. Both happened in 1992, a long time ago, but a year full of disasters in the Netherlands. In both dreams, I was standing in front of a window, observing the disaster unfolding. These dreams were also so vivid that I can still remember them in clear detail. The first one was that suddenly, I was in an office looking outside overlooking a chemical factory. I immediately knew that it was the Sindhu factory nearby. Suddenly, one of the reactor vessels exploded, setting the whole of the factory into flames. A few days later, on July 8, 1992, it did indeed happen. A trainee operator used the wrong recipe for the process. The reactor vessel overheated. The company brigade started cooling the vessel down, but to no avail. The vessel exploded. One of the valves was found 2 kilometers away. The 3 firemen died, and 11 other employees were injured, of which 1 had very severe burns. A few months later, at the end of September in 1992, suddenly I again had a vivid dream of standing in front of a window, this time at the Zilmer area in the southeast of Amsterdam. I saw military planes dropping bombs on a block of apartments. In the early evening of October 4th, 1992, an El Al cargo Boeing took off from Amsterdam Airport, heading to Tel Aviv. Just after takeoff, the captain notified traffic control that they had lost power in 2 engines and requested to return. What he didn't know was that he not only lost power in these engines, he physically lost the 2 engines. I think that they were actually the bombs that I thought I saw falling. The captain had very big troubles in controlling the airplane. He made some circles go up to the point that it could not hold the plane anymore, and it plunged almost nose down into the corner where 2 blocks of apartments met. It left a burning hole of rubble, 8 stories over a length of about 10 apartments, gone. The death toll was 43, of which 4 were aboard the plane. I have since then not had these kinds of dreams anymore. Maybe because both disasters happened within a radius of less than 10 kilometers from where I lived back then. This happened when I was around 10, in a house where the second floor was still under construction. My mom and grandma had a major disagreement back when we were living in Toronto, and my grandma decided to move to her home country, Ecuador. Soon after, due to complications, my mom decided to give in and follow her. We moved in with my grandma, but since the house was a little small for 4 people, and since my great-grandmother was soon to be moving in as well, my family decided to extend a floor. For the meantime, my great-grandma was staying in a room extension with her own bathroom because she would have accidents frequently. The room was an extension outside, close to the main door. My great-grandma was really old, but still cognitive enough to have fun conversations with, so I would spend a lot of time talking with her outside. She started telling me about this little green guy that would visit her at night, and he would just sit on the TV and watch her. In South America, we grew up talking about duendes, leprechauns that would mess with people wandering around strange areas at night. It's kind of our folklore, like the chupacabras or skinwalkers. But since my grandma was getting old, my mom would just brush it off and blame it on her aging or her mental health. One night my family went to a dinner party, but since I had a best friend over, I insisted on staying home. It was getting really late, but we were waiting for one of our favorite shows to air on Cartoon Network. My family is very religious and hated these quote-unquote demonic cartoons, so we tried to watch quietly. I was under the impression that my great-grandma was resting in one of the rooms behind us, in my mom's room, because I kept hearing noises coming from down the hall. Suddenly, I hear my grandma's walker clicking its way out of the room, so I quickly turned off the TV and told my friend to be quiet. We hid under the blankets and waited until my grandma went back to the room. She used to walk with one of those 4-legged walkers, and would take her time as she moved. We thought she was just going to use the washroom, so we decided to wait it out. Her walking seemed very quiet though, which was odd, but I didn't think much of it. She went to the washroom, but didn't open up the toilet lid. There was no noise, no peeing or anything. And the weirdest part? No word or call to see if we were sleeping or still up. We just heard the walking go straight back to the room quietly. Then suddenly I remembered that the dinner my family went to was meant to celebrate her. She wasn't home, and we were supposed to be alone. As soon as I realized that, we heard small footsteps sprinting from one room to the other, and then a glass breaking. We were petrified. We didn't know what was behind us, if it was someone that broke in or an animal, but we were too afraid to look. We stayed under the sheets until my family came back home. Fortunately, they arrived only moments after. As soon as my stepdad came in, we told him what happened. He brought my dog upstairs where the second floor was being built, as he was thinking that it would have been an animal that came in since the staircase was only being covered by a plastic sheet. My mom goes into my grandma's room and finds a glass jug on the floor with a broken handle. The jug was supposed to be in my room. Something had to have carried the jug and dropped it in there. My dog was also barking throughout the night, which was pretty common, but when he came in the house, he seemed really anxious to sprint upstairs, as if he knew something was there. My best friend and I have been through a couple of weird things back home, but nothing as vivid as this. Again, it could have been an animal, but that doesn't explain the metal walker noise that we heard. It could have been an intruder, but we would have definitely seen someone come through the plastic covering the stairwell. It could have been the little green guy my great-grandma talked about. A lot of times little shadows would rush through my peripherals, but I always thought it was just my imagination. She passed away only a couple months after this. But weird small footsteps and random dog chases never stopped. The footsteps I would hear didn't sound like small critters, since animals tend to bolt from place to place. The steps I remember hearing as a kid seemed much more meticulous and slow, and always late at night. This is a story that happened to me when I was just a fresh graduate, starting my first job at a temp agency. It was 2002, and my job was located in the middle of nowhere and very far from my home. Therefore, I took the effort of doing most of my job in the office till late at night, since I do not wish to come home and continue with work. Rather, that would give me some rest for the remainder of the night. I usually stayed up even later on Fridays, knowing that if I finished the work fully, the weekends would be golden for me. So, this story occurred on one of those Fridays when everyone else had already left. After making my prayers for the night, I continued with my work. There was no one I believed that was in the office, but I felt a presence. Perhaps it was another coworker working late just like me. I took that belief to heart. At one point in time, around 11 I believe, I needed to go to the toilet, which was located at the end of a long, dark hallway lighted only by the green exit sign. I found that the toilet was locked, so I looked to the toilet that is on the next level. I took the staircase, which was lighted by a circular wall lamp, and found that the toilet was unlocked. Thankfully, I did my business and returned back to work. The next part of the story comes in a rather weird way. As I made my way back, passing by the locked toilet, I saw the shadow of someone by the office door beaming from the front light that I had left on. My guess is that either the coworker was about to leave or that she was taking coffee for the night since the pantry is near the entrance. When I got there, there was no one by the pantry or the entrance, so again I went back to my desk. I was trying to finish up that last bit of work when I started to peek through the gap between each desk, trying to see the other person who was working late at night, but somehow, no matter what, I was unable to spot him or her. When I got finished up about 15 minutes later, I decided to get myself a drink from the pantry. Then, the lights went off. Just as I took the can of juice from the fridge, I turned to find myself in total darkness. There was a voice calling out to me, trying to reach me, and I tried to find it. The voice was unclear at the beginning, but soon it became what I think the person was saying, "Help me." The sound was the strongest by the window which was facing the main road that was now deserted. I looked about in the darkness, seeing if there was anyone in distress, and as I did so, I felt a hand touching my shoulder. I turned around, and no one was there. At this point already, I knew that I needed to get the hell out, and so I went to my desk and started packing. Then it came. It came from outside, falling with a piercing scream and with a clear face. The face of a bloody woman. I quickly rushed to the window, opened it up, and looked at the ground, but there was no one. I made my way to the ground floor and to the main road, clutching my laptop and backpack as I tried to search for a cab, but it felt like nearly hours, despite it only being minutes before one came by. What kept me at the edge was the fact that I felt like 1,000 boots were marching toward me, shouting in Japanese commands. I kept my eyes on the road, but occasionally I turned back to see my office building. On the last turn, I saw a bunch of uniformed men with rifles, gray faces bayoneting a bloody woman, stepping on her body, throwing what I believed to be her baby in the air and killing it as it landed on the ground. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran from the scene. It's been 4 or 5 years since my last encounter. I think I'm safe, right? Wrong. I moved last year and I recently thought, hey, remember those kids a few years ago? Funny, they can't get you now. Boy, was I ever incorrect. I live on a mountain, and like an hour away from the beach in a super populated neighborhood with my roommates. 2 chill lesbians and a college dude. Super cool people. I think nothing can hurt me now, because there are people everywhere. But no, I'm stupid and jinx myself. I was home 2 days ago. Class was canceled, and the dude of the house was home too and taking a nap. I'm in the kitchen watching Netflix and doing homework when there's a knock on the window. Obviously, this is weird as hell, but I have weird as hell friends. Maybe one of them are trying to scare me. I brush it off and continue what I was doing, and then it happens again. Once again, I brush it off because maybe it was the snow if it wasn't one of my friends. Things like this happen all the time with them. Well, it goes on for about 10 minutes, and I'm kinda starting to freak out. My friends don't have this much patience. I go to Charlie's room, the guy, and wake him up. I'm not the one that's usually riled up, so he's concerned too. We both go to the window. I have my phone out with the camera and 911 within a touch, and Charlie has a bat. We look out the window, and no one is there. After a minute, we calm down and go and sit in the living room. Charlie's mom is a cop, so he says he'll tell her about it later. We think we're okay, so we chill and watch TV together. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rings. I go and open the door. At first, I don't see anything. Then, down on the bottom of the stairs of the apartment, I see 3 young boys dressed in black hoodies, jeans, with brown or black bangs. At first, I didn't move. I was frozen in place. Then Charlie asked who it was, and I came to my senses and got a good look at the kids, then slammed the door shut behind me. I started bawling, and I mean sobbing. I had no clue what to do. Charlie's freaking out because I don't cry, especially in front of people like that. He ran to the door with the bat that we have on the windowsill and looked outside. He saw them too. He started freaking out because he didn't know what to do, so he started yelling at them to leave. He said they started smiling. I was crying even more now, and he was still screaming, and I think the neighbors wanted to call the cops. Now think about this. He didn't know what they were. He thought they were normal kids that had scared me. He didn't see their eyes yet. I started yelling at him to go inside when I hear a bunch of footsteps running up the stairs and Charlie screams and runs in. He's telling me he saw their eyes and that they were black, and now we're both freaking out and grabbing kitchen knives. Eventually we calm down and look outside again. No one's there, but we can see a group of kids past the complex with 3 that we think might have been the BEKs. I told him about the other thing that happened to me, and now we're scared to be in this house. We told the other roommates, and they thought we were high or something, so once again, no one believes me. This happened about 3 days ago, and I've been on edge ever since. It's 12:44 a.m., and 10 minutes ago, I saw a ghost. I live in the basement, which is almost finished, so it isn't the creepy, empty stages anymore. It's really comfortable and homey. Today, though, my parents are putting up a new wall separating my room from the laundry room, so that's the change. It's a little uncomfortable tonight, and I do admit that having such an open space where I could see and not see everything is a little spooky, but I wasn't actively thinking about it, and I was actually really relaxed and just scrolling through TikTok on my phone. This is the setup. I have my bed in the middle of the room, my TV is adjacent from me, on, playing Family Guy. I'm facing left, which is facing the laundry room, and the almost built wall. There's a small landing that goes to my sister's room, which is also in the basement. The back storage room, which the light was on, and then the stairs that go up. My fan, which is also to my left, is on. I can't hear a whole lot besides the fan, my phone, and the TV. My phone is positioned almost directly in front of my face, but with what I saw, it was not in my peripheral, it was directly next to my phone screen, so I clearly saw it. A half-white figure walked past from the landing into the laundry room. I could only see the bottom half of it. It was clearly opaque white. I thought it was my dog at first, so I sat up and called her name a few times, but she didn't come. Then I thought maybe it was my parents and they just couldn't hear me, but I didn't see the laundry room light turn on, or the washing machine or anything turn on. So I turned on my flashlight and called my dog's name again, thinking that she might be getting into something. When she still didn't come to me, I got up with my flashlight still on and turned the bedroom light on. Then I checked everything out to see if it was my dog, and if she was just being silly, or maybe even if it was a cat. Nothing was there, so I got freaked out and went to my sister's room, which her light was on, and the storage room light was on. My sister wasn't in her room, she was in the garage. So I told her what had happened, and she thinks my mind is probably just playing tricks on me since there's changes going on downstairs, and it's a little scary down there right now. Which, I admit, it is, but I was really comfortable, and about to go to sleep. I have been in those instances where I freak myself out, like watching a scary movie or something, and I convince myself that I heard or saw something, but of course nothing happened, and I sleep fine. But tonight it was different. I just know it. As soon as I figured out that it wasn't my dog or my parents or any cats, I began to feel nauseous and my heart started pounding. Now, this isn't the first time a paranormal experience has happened in this house. It's just the first time in a while. Recently, my grandmother passed away upstairs in what's now my parents' bedroom. My grandfather also passed away in this house in the hallway going to the garage. Every paranormal experience we've had, we know that it was one of my grandparents, since it was never malvoyant and we never felt nervous or scared. I'm not saying the spirit I saw was malvoyant. I do believe that it was my grandma, but it still did freak me out, and I did cry. It's only been a month and a half without her, so it's nice to know she's still around. But it was awful timing, Grandma. I'm now sleeping upstairs until my parents finish the wall. Good spirit or not, it's still nerve-wracking to have a paranormal experience. This may have been a huge coincidence, but last January I applied for my grandfather's military service records. He died in 1981, way before I was born. I applied for his records and didn't think anything more of it. Several months went by, and I assumed that things were just moving slowly. 6 months later, without hearing any news of his records arriving, one night I had a very vivid dream. I don't often remember my dreams anymore. In my dream, I was in a very white, very bare room with high walls and a high ceiling. On a small table in front of me was a box, and inside was my grandfather's military service history. The dream simply revolved around my taking a good look through them. Nothing too exciting. The next morning I wake up and remember the dream, maybe around an hour after I got up. 10 minutes later, a large envelope drops through my letterbox. It was my grandfather's service records. Odd? Just coincidence? A second, much stranger event occurred on the evening when my grandmother passed away. She had passed in the early morning and had been taken to the Chapel of Rest, which was not too far from the apartment where I was living. That evening, my parents invited me and my girlfriend for a dinner to celebrate her life. In the car, as we drove past the chapel, a leaf landed on the windscreen. The leaf was a perfect heart shape, upside down, so that the light from the streets illuminated the perfectness of the heart shape onto the car's dashboard. The leaf stayed on the windscreen for a minute or so, and right as we turned away and out of our town, it blew off and back toward the chapel itself. I do have a video of the leaf and the heart on the windshield. For a while afterward, shuffling footsteps and noises kept occurring in my parents' house, and they sounded exactly how my grandmother used to walk. We all heard them moving across the upstairs landing. After around 2 weeks, it stopped, and has never happened since. Odd, strangely comforting, and food for thought for a semi-skeptic who finds the subject of the paranormal fascinating. So I had to shut it off so that I could live a normal life again without seeing them. But my cousin, who has no abilities, has seen them in the house. At first, when he moved in, he didn't know that it was haunted. I didn't want to tell him that the house was haunted because I thought, well, maybe it's not. And if I told him, he would believe it was, and that would influence him in some way. If it was haunted, I was going to let him find out on his own, or if it didn't bother him, then I would let it be. As the weeks passed and things moved in front of our eyes, he started to hear his family members' voices calling his name from time to time in the middle of the night. It was the same experience that I had had. He would have a nightmare sometimes of something trying to come inside of the room, yet it was stuck on the other side of the door, unable to get in. It was beckoning him to let it inside, to open the door. It's odd because I actually have a video of it doing that, and it's heard in the video faintly. When I lived alone, it would occur very frequently, but instead of in dreams, it was literally in real life and happening on camera. I did not show him the video beforehand, so there's no way he could have known. Eventually, I did open up to him about it being haunted, but that it's not really a big deal or anything, since my family ends up in the haunted house usually, for some odd reason. I explained that if we made excuses and such, that the activity would remain low. For instance, if something slides across the floor in front of us, we just pass it off as something else, no matter how stupid that excuse or rationalization is, and we say it out loud, shrug it off, and move on. Sometimes if it happens again after that, we just make another excuse, and then it stops. If something pounds on our walls from all directions, which only usually happens for a few seconds, we just ignore it, and make another excuse. And then life goes on as normal. My cousin would be laying in bed at night, and he explained that he would see this almost rippling kind of apparition. I thought it must be an eyesight issue, so I asked him to show me where it was. Weirdly enough, it was the same wall that I had had a nightmare about months ago involving things trying to climb out of a black tar-like door with nearly 100 arms covered in the tar-like goo. So yeah, it was weird, and he didn't have that experience again. Anyway, in the room one day when I was living there on my own, I had seen a woman, pretty much the generic, typical ghost. Most of them don't seem to look like that in real life, but in movies they do. Just a young woman who floated through my bedroom door and then through the wall beside it. Nearly entirely see-through, and from the waist down, she looked as if she were made of mist or fog. No color at all, and also in a very old, almost wedding gown type of dress. Also in the room, I would often see glowing white, circular orb-like things that would float and then leave. Almost like a flicker, but I thought it was just, I don't know, a headache or whatever. But it was always in one spot of the room. Well, my cousin saw it too, again in the exact same spot that I would usually see it in. And then I told him that it happens sometimes. He's gotten used to the house, and most of the activity stopped happening after I shut it off. I also bought a little spirit box, and would use it outside whenever the activity would go up. Soon after I went back inside, life was back to normal and the activity would subside for another month or two. Before the spirit box, the activity was nearly unlivable, dangerous almost. Now it's extremely silent. Like we have an actual home now. If anything, it's just a house that happens to be haunted, but a house nonetheless. With all of the haunted houses my family and I have lived in, my only advice is to never let a haunting consume you. This happened when I was around 9 or 10. I was staying the night at my friend Catherine's for the first time. We met the summer before and were inseparable ever since. Kat lived in this old 2-story house surrounded by woods and dirt road. The house itself gave me an uneasy feeling when I first saw it. The shutters were falling off. The paint on the house seemed to be fading. It was an old piece of crap now that I think about it, but at the time I was nervous and excited. I remember walking in after I stared at the house for what seemed like 20 minutes. Surprisingly, the inside was a lot nicer than the outside, so I pushed that uneasy feeling down and just shrugged it off as nerves. I remember the smell of the house. I can't pinpoint it, but it was different, like walking into a musty room. I started to walk around just to explore my surroundings, but I noticed Kat's mom watching me. I simply smiled and waved, but she just stood there staring at me wide-eyed. I've never met her before, but why was she looking at me like that? Suddenly, Kat flew around the corner and tackled me. We both fell and started to giggle. I noticed Kat's mom out of the corner of my eye start to turn around and walk off. She was gone, just like that. Fast forward a couple hours. Kat and I are laying on a beanbag in her room watching Children of the Corn, which, by the way, was one of my favorite movies at the time. I grew up watching horror movies, mostly Stephen King or any movie my mom was watching. Not her decision, mine, because I love the feeling that a good horror movie gives you. She felt the same way, and that's why we clicked so much. Back to the story. We were sitting here watching this movie, and suddenly the door opposite us slams closed. We both jumped, giggled, and brushed it off because, well, we were kids. Until the second time, when it creaked open and slammed again, not even seconds after the first time. Now I'm sitting there staring at this door, trying to figure out how in the hell it's opening and closing by itself. In the midst of all that, the only other person in this house is her mom, who I figured out earlier was just a tad bit creepy. "You think it's just your mom?" I asked her, but she shook her head. "You sure?" I asked again, but she said something that gave me chills, and still gives me chills, just telling this story. "My mom isn't home, it's just me and you, silly." I just stare at her while she's staring at me, trying to wrap my head around what she had just told me. "Where is your mom?" I asked her. "She's at work." I giggled, thinking that she was just trying to trick me. "She is at work. She only works for a couple hours, so she leaves me here because she trusts me." At this point, I'm just looking at her, and she noticed this look of concern on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "If your mom is at work, then who was that lady looking at me earlier?" As I said this, we heard what seemed like footsteps at the time, but thinking about it now, it sounded like shuffling in one spot above us. I'm completely terrified at this point. Every hair on my neck is standing on end, and I just want to leave. I start to get up when Kat pulled me back down and asked me if I had heard the noise. I nodded. It was silent again until the footsteps were back, but louder and faster. We both gazed up at the ceiling and she grabbed my hand. "This happens every day," she whispered. I look over at her and can truly see the fear on her face. The footsteps stopped and she looked at me, her face flushed white. "Is there an attic?" I asked. She pointed up toward the ceiling. "Well, maybe it's just squirrels or birds," I kept thinking over and over. "You ever notice when you're really quiet? That's when you can hear almost everything around you. Imagine if you're sitting in a house with your best friend alone at 10 years old and you hear the giggle of a 3-year-old child. Mind you, she has no younger brothers or sisters. We were completely alone. Kat was just as scared as I was. I remember thinking that I just wanted to get out of the house. Just grab her and run out the door. At least we would feel safer and less scared outside than we would in. "Want to hear a story?" Kat asked, pulling my mind back to reality. I nodded. "Well, this house used to be a daycare. There was this lady that would watch the kids, and one day she just locked them in the attic and then hung herself from a rope in the kitchen. They all died because the kids were hungry and thirsty and no one found them for months. In this house." My heart started to pound. My eyes were wide with fear. "It's true," she said. "I've seen them, the little kids, every day. But I never saw the lady, but you have. Earlier." After she told me this, I don't remember much else aside from running out the door of her room and making it outside that house. Kat followed, begging me to stay, but I just had to leave. My stomach felt like it was in knots. I felt like I had walked into a horror movie myself, and just wished that this day had never happened. Fast forward to years later. That was the last day that I had seen or heard from Kat. I remember her always coming to play outside at my dad's during the day. I remembered what she looked like. I remembered meeting her parents and seeing them out in public. I'm now 27, and I can't seem to find any proof that she even existed. All my friends that I was friends with then, I'm still friends with now, even after all these years. But why not her? I drove by that house maybe 15 times, and still wonder if maybe she was just one of the ones that never made it out. I work in an Alzheimer's unit. Most of the residents don't stay around for very long because they're on hospice, so basically I barely get to know them, and before I know it, they've passed away. One resident we had did not have dementia, but schizophrenia. Her sister stuck her in there as more of a convenience for herself rather than considering her sister's mental health. The resident was extremely bright, and remembered silly things that even I couldn't recall that had happened. Once COVID hit, she decided life wasn't worth living, and that she would never get better. She starved herself to death. It was heartbreaking, and she suffered many delusions and manic episodes during her last days. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened the month following her passing, until the fire alarm went off out of nowhere during lunch. My coworker and I immediately went to guard the outside doors since they would unlock automatically once the fire alarm was triggered. We assumed it was another drill and were annoyed that it had happened at such a busy time of the day. On my way to the back door, I popped my head into each room just to make sure that everything was clear. When I came to that empty room, the minute that I opened the door, it was frigid. I assumed that it was normal since the room was empty and thought nothing more of it. I stood by the back door and waited for the alarm to stop. My boss came back with a concerned look on his face and told me that the alarm system said that it was coming from the room where that resident had just recently passed. I explained to him that that would be impossible because I had just checked and there was no sign of a fire. The alarm continued to go haywire for another 30 minutes, even when shut off. It was extremely bizarre. Afterward, I had asked out loud if it was our resident who had just passed, and it felt like a warm bucket of water was dumped over my head, and I couldn't resist the urge to cry. The kind of crying and sobbing that hurts your entire body. Sometimes, she opens the fire extinguisher box to remind me that she's still around. You need a key and a strong arm to crank that box open. Anyway, I found it open again today after doing rounds, and was reminded of this experience. Recently I moved into a new house. Two close friends, let's call them E and R, moved in along with me. When we went to view the house, nothing seemed off about it. However, about a week in, we screwed up. E had been cleaning out the attic and came across a wooden box. It looked fairly new and we didn't think anything could ever go wrong with it. E and I looked inside the box. All that was there was 4 candles, an old matchbox with no matches, and a small wooden doll. E and I set it aside, not interested. We ended up putting it back in the attic, apart from the doll, which R wanted to put in her potted plant. We proceeded with our sorting and forgot all about the box. That night, when I went to bed, I felt as if I were being watched. It was unnerving, but I eventually fell asleep. A few hours later, I heard something bang against the floor above me. I would have brushed it off as E, as his room was up there, if what had happened next didn't take place. For a bit of background knowledge, in September of 2017, R was in a car crash. The others were fine, but R ended up in a wheelchair. R called out for me. It wasn't calm as it usually was, but frantic. I moved into her room, and she asked me if I had heard the crash. I told her I had and thought that it was just E. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that E was working a night shift. It was unlike her to be so flustered, so I offered to stay with her, which she accepted. Soon after, we began to hear light footsteps and giggles outside ours room. We were scared, but continued to try and tune it out. R fell asleep, but I stayed with her, scared shitless by possible ghost children. Eventually, the stupid undead kids stopped running up and down the halls, so I assumed they left. I was then able to fall into a well-deserved slumber. Then, maybe an hour or so later, E got back from work. I know this because he is incapable of entering anywhere quietly. And then he screamed, like a grown man screaming as if he were a little girl. He ran up the stairs into my room, and then out of my room because I was with R, and then he ran into R's room. He then told us what had happened. Apparently, he'd been putting his work bag down, and felt as if he were being watched. He looked up, and for a split second saw a little boy and girl holding hands. Now, normally I wouldn't have believed anything like this, but he's an honest bloke, and I saw the look of terror on his face. During the past few years, my gifts of clairvoyancy have developed further, which has created some moments where I truly have questioned my sanity. Former teachers of mine have communicated to me from beyond their grave. 2 of them have led me to where they are buried, and I have predicted 3 district deaths. The first teacher to come through was actually a nurse from the local school, followed by my 6th grade social studies teacher. I was aware that the nurse had passed away in 2012, so I wasn't surprised when she came through. However, I was unaware of the second one passing, and immediately went into denial mode. Eventually, through clues via dreams and meditation, I was able to locate her final resting place. I went from being in denial to being absolutely speechless. I followed the clues that she gave me, and there I was, at her grave. It was at that moment that I realized that what I was dealing with was reality, and that I was not losing my mind. The creepy thing is the numbers of her plot are the same as the numbers in the school district where she taught. As I was visiting her on March 1st, 2017, I had a flash or image prediction about another former teacher passing away, and they would be buried in the same cemetery. On March 6th, another one of my 6th grade teachers passed away, and a few days later they were buried in the same cemetery. The process repeated itself, and he led me to where he is buried. That isn't the only death or dreams, visions that I've had. I've had 2 others. One was in December of 2016, hours after the teacher passed away, and one was in June 2017, 6 months prior to her passing. There seems to be no time structure when it comes to dreams or visions, and the time of passing itself. It ranges in hours after to 6 months before. A couple of months ago I had another dream, and while nothing has happened as of yet, I am very concerned. I live in England in a 2-story flat, and I have always believed in the paranormal. But my dad does not believe in any type of ghost or anything supernatural. I never thought that this flat was haunted. However, as I got older, I started to feel uncomfortable by myself, and I saw shadows downstairs out of the corner of my eye. Now, there is an attic directly above our 2nd floor, but there is no way for us to enter it, as you cannot access it from this flat. The only way to access this attic is by having a specific key that can open the attic, as it is council flats, which is above my neighbor's house. However, the attic above my flat is the only one which is blocked off, and there is no way to enter it. I have the last flat on the end of these 18 council flats. There are no neighbors above us, just the attic, which no one can access without that key, and they would still not be able to get above our flat. One night about 2 years ago, all of the family was in bed, and it was about 3 in the morning. All of a sudden, I heard something crash above. It was so loud that it woke all my family members up, and we all got up and stood on the landing together. After that bang, we heard 3 loud footsteps, and the sound of something being dragged behind these footsteps. It was so scary, as we know that nobody can physically get up there. My dad was not convinced that it was a ghost. He thought that somebody had somehow gotten into the attic, so he went outside to check if the communal attic door was opened. I followed him outside, and it was completely padlocked shut with heavy chains around the lock. I tried to explain to him, how can there be anyone up in our part of the attic when it's blocked off and impossible to get into? We came back into the house, and we were all quite shaken up. My brother was young and was able to get to sleep, but I was awake all night. After this experience, I started to smell old cigarette smoke every time I would enter my toilet, and it was so stale and stagnant. After the event, me, my brother, and my mom were going away on holiday, whilst my dad had to stay there and work. He told me he slept with his headphones in every night, as even he felt uncomfortable by himself. As a family, we still have no idea what those noises were, and since then we have heard many strange things. When I was like 13, my mom and her boyfriend had to go to the hospital, and no one would be able to get my brother to the bus stop the next morning because they had to stay overnight. So, I got to miss school the next day to take my brother. After I made sure my brother got on the bus, I went home and cleaned and did random stuff, like a 13-year-old would do. It was around 11:45 when there was a knock on my door. Thinking it was the mailman or a neighbor or something, I opened the door and said hello. There was this kid. He couldn't have been much older than me at the time, but he had bangs that were covering his eyes, which I found weird because it was like 107 degrees out. So this kid was super still. Like, I thought that one of my friends put a mannequin there and ran away or something. But then it spoke. It sounded like a robot or something. It was like it was programmed to say this. My mother said to ask someone for a phone in fear that I get lost. Do you have a phone? At this point, I was crapping my pants because 1, I'm a 13-year-old girl, and this older boy was dressed like a burglar and at my door with half his face covered. 2, for some reason, I just couldn't look away. I felt like if I moved or said anything other than yes, that I would explode. And 3, I saw 2 other boys around the same age standing in my driveway dressed exactly the same way as the one in front of me. Baggy jeans, dark hoodie, and scruffed up Vans. I began to stutter and shake my head. It was the only thing I could do. I finally got out a no and then started to close my door, but he put his foot in the way. Then the 2 others started walking up, and I was going, hell no. I grabbed the bat by the door and threatened him. If you don't leave right now, I'll kick your ass and then call the cops. I shouted loud enough so that at least one of my neighbors could hear, I hoped. Now, I was this short girl with SpongeBob pajama pants on. I was in no way intimidating. Then he moved his foot and stepped back into the middle of the other 2 perfectly. Then the far right one said in the exact same tone of voice as the first, I'm sorry to bother you. I'll just come again later and ask. Internally, I was planning my funeral. Just as I was about to close the door, the first one smiled and looked up. And that was when I saw that they had black eyes. Then the other 2 looked up, and they were the same. I was like, nope, and slammed the door shut, then called my neighbor, who was this big-ass 20-something-year-old dude. He ran over and looked for them all around my house, but he said they were gone. When I told my mom all of this, she didn't believe me and said I was lying. Said me, the girl with absolutely no social life, who was afraid of her own shadow, was lying. I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. Loved the job, would have stayed longer, but administration sucked. Anyhow, that's another story. I worked night shift, and I've had some really creepy things happen that just could not be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in the infirmary. Okay, so I was there maybe a month. Not a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who has spent any time in a jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it is a very distinctive, definitive, loud noise. To get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by a central control. So I'm sitting at my desk, and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it, and it opens about halfway, and then just slammed shut. Now in my office, there is a huge glass window so that the nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. When the door slammed, I thought it was just one of the officers messing around, and I jumped up and went to the window, but no one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I just woke him from a sound sleep, and I said, "Ha ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about. And I knew this officer, and I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank, because frankly, he was kind of a jerk-off with absolutely no sense of humor. After that, I just thought it was some mechanical glitch. I sat down, and everything just changed. It felt colder, and I sensed that I was being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I took my stethoscope from around my neck and put it on the desk and left my office to go into the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the desk, on the side, underneath. It just wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on the shift with the key. Now I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere, and I cannot find it. In my office there is a large closet that holds all supplies that is also locked, with the key being on the set of keys that I carry. Anyhow, later in the shift, I needed to go into the closet and get something. I really don't remember what. And sitting in the middle of the floor is my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicks again, opens halfway, and slams shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared shitless, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after. So I go back in, and I swear the whole atmosphere was lighter. It was warmer, and I felt way more comfortable. When my shift was over, the central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut with not a single person near them or in the hallway. I wish I could say that that was the last time it happened, or that I got more comfortable with it. I did not, because each time it happened it seems that the doors slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer, almost as if I were being stalked. Things that went missing were found in different parts in the jail. My pen case in the women's wing, my med sheets in solitary central control room, my portable blood pressure cuff in the kitchen. And each and every time something of mine would show up in another part of the jail, the officers and I would look at the tapes and see no one. Remember, I said I felt like I was being stalked. Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse who worked nights. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had anything happen either. No doors slam, click open, shut, no stuff moving. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down that this kind of incident never, ever had occurred before. It got to the point for me that I started just not staying in my office. I would just get all the stuff that I needed for my shift and sit at the officer's desk. I did that until I left there and got another job. I haven't had anything like that happen ever again. I am right now sitting on my front porch, smoking a cigarette. I cannot bring myself to go back inside my house. There is someone in there. Just over 2 months ago, I moved into a new house after losing nearly everything to COVID. I won't go into details or draw this out. Typing this out makes my eyes well, and every hair on my body stands straight up, but damn it, I saw a human-shaped shadow in my walk-in closet. Am I going crazy? Maybe, but I know that I am not at the same time. This is what happened. I was laying on my bed browsing Reddit, and from the corner of my eye, I caught movement coming from my closet. Within literal milliseconds, I turn and see someone standing inside of it, looking right at me. I flipped out, sprung up, ran out of my room, slammed the door, and grabbed a kitchen knife. I yelled and screamed about calling police, that I had a knife, and basically acted like a scared monkey. No response. After about a minute of yelling and screaming, and realizing that I had left my phone in my bedroom to call 911, I slowly peeked in. There was simply nothing there. Nothing. No one could have gone anywhere. I am pissed and terrified about this. I saw this person. I saw their shape, their movement, their arms. There was a humanoid figure in my closet, and that is all I know. I'm going to start this out by giving some background on my mother. She's currently 58, a nurse, and a devoted Christian. Other than the occasional drink, she doesn't do anything to alter her mind. This story begins one day when my mom laid down for a nap. The way she described it, she wasn't asleep, but she began to see a video of sorts repeating in her head as soon as she closed her eyes. She saw a young teenage girl dressed in a schoolgirl outfit, floating away in a boat and waving. My mom could feel her emotions, her sadness and worry for her grandmother as she said goodbye. She could feel that this girl was going to a peaceful place. As well as this, she saw a calendar turn 3 times. This vision repeated itself once or twice, until my mother came to. She thought it was a vision of our family friend Shannon, but it didn't look quite like her. Later on, during the month of March, there was a shooting at a local rave. Shannon's younger sister was shot and killed. She was wearing the exact schoolgirl outfit that my mother saw her in during the vision. The fact that it happened in March means that the calendar was a warning of what was to come. We are unsure of why exactly my mom was meant to see this, but we were able to provide some comfort to the family by letting them know that she was somewhere safe and peaceful. All the guards at my workplace know this theater is haunted. We're all used to the super eerie feelings down in the lower levels, backstage areas. Most of it can be passed off as long work hour stress, but there is definitely some evil shit in this building with us. It's probably an entity that's latched itself onto themes like theatrics and whatnot. I don't know. We got all kinds of stories. We have all heard the grand piano playing on its own in the night, heard ghostly voices arguing every now and then as we walk through the halls. Sometimes I smell a harsh burning in the halls at night, like sulfur. We all know that doesn't mean well. Tonight has been the worst it's ever been. I heard a door slam shut nearby as I was patrolling, and as a joke, I yelled out, "Who it be?" Inside joke with me and my friends to lighten my nerves. And I heard a deep, almost unintelligible male voice saying, "It be me." Sounds kind of funny, but I did not enjoy that. My Bluetooth headphones blatantly refused to work tonight. I also walked through one of the function halls in the darkness. Once the building closes, we patrol without many lights on, other than the occasional safety lights here and there. and I saw something following me in the mirror. I refused to look behind me or stare at the mirror too long, but it appeared to be a figure clearly dressed in the costume of like a king with a fur robe and a black jagged crown. Its head was tilting side to side as it shuffled along behind me, kind of like a wind-up toy. It moved so soundlessly that I was pretty startled by it. I couldn't feel my legs out of dread, so I didn't even stop walking. I just stopped looking immediately and calmly kept the same pace on my way out of the room, pretending to see nothing. I think this is happening due to the current performance of a really old and famous play called Faust. A very famous actor died performing it here in Melbourne a long time ago in another theater nearby, and his ghost allegedly haunts the theater to this day. It's not far down the road from our theater. There is also a secret warehouse on the site, the location of which, for obvious reasons, we do not share with the public. But this warehouse is basically a storage room full of really old and valuable artifacts that have to do with early modern theater and music. Authentic historical pieces like 18th century instruments and old chests and trunks that belong to people of fame. One-of-a-kind tapes recorded by famous rock and blues musicians, old stage set models, some dating back all the way to the 1800s. It's crazy. I know for a fact that some of these old artifacts bring with them the presence of beings potentially even older than they are. You couldn't pay me to open some of these creepy-looking trunks. Safe to say, I'm glad I'm casual now and no longer work full-time. I've been working here for almost a year. It's hands down the most haunting place that I have ever experienced. I'm a die-hard agnostic skeptic with an open mind. I believe that anything is possible, but I want a logical and, preferably, scientific reason behind that anything. The last 10 days, however, have been absolutely insane. It started when I was a little kid. In my memories, I see kids between the ages of 5 and 11 with solid black eyes and smiles too big for their faces. I had a bad childhood, so I just figured they were added memories by an imaginative mind, because that's the answer that solidly fits my skeptical scientific worldview. Last month, I started seeing a girl. She told me about her experiences with sleep paralysis and shadow people. I explained to her that it was a rational experience caused by being in a hypnagogic state. Then she brought up the Cheshire Cat kids. Her recollections matched mine as a child. It was unnerving to say the least, and she and I spent almost an hour discussing the most minute details about them. Our stories matched. So, she does acid with her friends about 10 days ago, and told me that she stepped outside. A group of 6 of them were waiting for her. They showed her scenes from my life that were my darkest. She described them to me too accurately for her to have heard them from a second-hand source, which would be hard to do anyway, considering that I don't like sharing such detailed information. They then told her that I was going to die soon, and that she should stay away from me. This has put a monkey wrench into one of the most promising relationships of my 25 years. Since that night, I have nightmares of them coming into my room, licking my forehead, and showing me the memories of my past as if they were happening in that moment, complete with smells, sounds, sights, etc. I have written this part off as my subconscious mind reacting with my long-dormant PTSD, but they got more and more vivid. While this is happening, she has been distancing herself more and more. Last night was the weirdest part of the tale, however. I was driving down a windy country road to calm myself, and a pair of headlights flies from around a bend and runs me off the road, almost into a tree. When I looked, however, there was no car, and the headlights extinguished after passing me. I'm chalking all of this up to anxiety-started delusions and possible schizophrenia. but I cannot explain how she knew what she did and why all of this is suddenly happening. So I've been sitting on this story for 3 years, telling some close friends who respond with astonished looks and advise on mental health and think I'm completely insane. It's 11:17 in rural New Brunswick, Canada, and I'm getting in my car to head back to Fredericton from my parents' place in the middle of nowhere. I had just finished up a small gig at a local fair, having had 1 or 2 beers at the show. I'm just pulling out of my parents' driveway onto a dim country road going back to the city when I turn on my high beams to see a tall, lanky, completely black figure standing in the ditch on the right side of the road. I mean, this thing must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. It absorbed all light and had limbs no bigger around than a baguette. As soon as I saw it, it started to run up the ditch and across the road in a very fast, very strange, gliding kind of way. I slammed on the brakes and watched this thing run across the road and into a field on the other side of the road towards some woods. I'm getting goosebumps writing this, but I could still see its silhouette speeding across the field in my neighbor's yard as it went into the black of the night. I stopped for a moment, shivering, before speeding up the road to a safe distance. I had no idea what I had just seen, so I called my mom to tell her that I had just witnessed this tall, alien-looking creature less than 100 meters from our home. She and my sister searched online with what I had told them, and came back with an article on the Black Stick Man phenomena, which fit exactly what I had seen on this normal August night in New Brunswick. This experience has really opened my mind to the paranormal, so for that I'm almost thankful. I was looking over my shoulder for a few weeks, afraid to go out at night, and I still feel unnerved when thinking about it. I haven't seen anything like it since, but have had some experiences with spirits growing up in what my whole family agrees is a haunted house. When I was a kid, I lived in a 1-story house that had a very small space that you could consider an attic. We didn't keep anything up there because it was such a small space. I don't even know where the entrance to it was, if there was one. But, and this started right as we moved in, after we would go to bed, I lived with my grandparents, I would start hearing footsteps up there. I knew they were footsteps because they would move in a rhythm and go from one end of the house to the other. I lived in that house from when I was 8 to 12 years old, and this happened every night. I repeatedly tried telling my grandparents about this, and they always said it was just the house settling. I was never able to sleep well as a kid, so while my grandparents would be asleep as soon as 8 p.m. struck, I would be lying awake in bed staring at the ceiling. It was always the most terrifying when the footsteps stopped right above me, like right over my bed, and then in a few seconds to minutes they would walk back to some other location up there. Nobody ever believed me that this was happening. My granddad had even found holes that had apparently been drilled in several of the walls, one in the bathroom, and he wrote it off as a previous owner running cables through the walls. Lived in that house for 4 years, and was convinced that someone was living in the ceiling above us and would become active when they thought that we had gone to sleep. I'll never forget that. It always happened at the same time of night, right after we went to bed. This was back in the late 90s to the early 2000s, so I don't know if there could have been cameras or something that they could have been watching us on, but they definitely knew when we went to bed. I'm still to this day convinced that someone was up there. Paranormal? I don't know. It's worth mentioning that one of the previous owner's kids did die in the house. They had a wolf-dog hybrid as a pet that mauled him in the living room. Anyway, I thought I'd share that because literally no one believed me, ever. to this day. But I know that footsteps are different from houses settling. This would go on into the wee hours of the morning, and I would usually finally pass out when the footsteps had gone off to a different part of the house. I'm going to tell about my experience, but for certain reasons I will not be naming anyone specifically. It was 2014. I was 13 years old at the time, and my great-grandmother was in a nursing home as her mental health had started to slip and as my great-aunt and uncle couldn't take care of her anymore. I remember the last time that I had seen her in person. It was a sunny January afternoon, and me, my parents, grandparents, and my aunt and uncle had decided to talk outside as opposed to the sad, depressing clinical interior of the nursing home. Despite my great-grandmother having memory issues, she recognized me right away and told me specifically hello. It's March of 2014, and during the night, I'm having memory flashbacks of things that me and my great-grandmother used to do, like stringing long strands of old-fashioned buttons, or the time I had my first ever garden-grown tomato raw, sitting on the porch swing with her while my grandfather worked in the field. I remember waking up that morning and asking, almost demanding my mother to call the nursing home, or my great-aunt and uncle, and she called them while I took a shower. After I got done, my mother informed me that my grandmother had indeed passed away from old age. I spent the rest of the day walking around our house in an almost trance-like state. I will preface this by saying that I think I'm silly to believe in ghosts, and I get embarrassed to speak about it. The alternative to believing that I was haunted is admitting that I am much more mentally ill than I had ever believed, which is absolutely possible. This took place over a few years in a farmhouse in the desert of Arizona. It was newly developed land. We moved into the place when I was 15. At the time, I was going through a lot emotionally, and smoking a lot of weed. That might explain some of my personal experiences, so I'll try not to dwell on them too much. The house was set up almost plantation style. It was very wide, had a big wraparound porch, and lots of awkward corners. The front room was a tall library, with an open balcony to the upstairs, which ran into long, skinny bedrooms. My parents' room was closest to the stairs and was attached to a nursery with a sliding ensuite door. My brother's rooms, who were 2 years younger than me, and my room were at the end of a dark hallway. That side of the house never got sun, so it had bad vibes all around. Downstairs, there was a messed-up Harry Potter-style closet, a sunken-in living room, a kitchen in the center of the house, and a sunken playroom for the baby. It honestly started the first day that we moved in. My brother and I were the only ones in the house, and we were unboxing plates. It was so empty that everything in there echoed. I swear it sounded like a little girl laughed, like a creepy track that you could get off of an app or something. Keep in mind, the TVs were not plugged in. We were on an acre of land, far away from the dirt road, and my brother was way too stupid to pull a prank like that. I started hearing voices at night. This wasn't unusual. I honestly used to freak myself out so badly that I think I made noises up to scare myself. My parents had raised me not to talk about things scaring me, to tough it out and be a big girl. It was fine most of the time during the day. Everything bad came at night. I remember distinctly when it started messing with me in bed. In solidarity, my brother and I kept our bedroom doors open for the hallway's nightlight, and in case we needed to call for each other. We had a pretty messed up childhood that might have contributed to all the codependency I'll describe during this. I was falling asleep, but not quite out. I felt the blanket slipping off the bed and reached down to grab it. This was common. I didn't have a bed frame with a foot. It kept slipping no matter how I tried to tuck it. In classic horror movie fashion, the last time I pulled it, I felt tension. There was nothing it could have been caught on. I felt like the second I went from confused to terrified, it bounced back to me. I don't know how to explain this that well, but I was certain that someone was under the bed pulling it away from me. Later, I moved another nightlight into the bedroom. It was a kind of spooky amber orange, and I convinced my parents to let me paint the walls cherry red. Again, I was almost asleep, but not quite out, so I don't think it could have been sleep paralysis. I heard the carpet rustle, and maybe joints cracking. It sounded like my mom had come in to check on me. I opened my eyes, and immediately froze. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. There was a woman crawling across my floor from the far side of my room to the foot of my bed. She was pale and stringy-haired as if she were going bald. I couldn't see her face. I don't know how I fell asleep. I couldn't scream or move. I think she disappeared under my bed. But again, this could always be a hallucination. My baby brother was about 7 months old when she started coming out during the day. My mom was a teacher at the time and was able to stay home with us during summer vacation. It was lunchtime and we were watching a movie quietly downstairs while the baby napped. There were noises upstairs, as if something had been dropped to the ground. We listened for a second before my mom ran up. She thought the baby had fallen out of his crib. We opened the door and found him sound asleep. There was weird white stuff on the floor. It took us a while to figure out that it was drywall or something like that. There was a crawl space to a small attic where the AC and insulation could be reached. It was barely big enough to get into and a good 9 feet from the ground. It also had to be pushed up and slid over to open. There was a visible gap. The carpet was a really ugly dark blue, so we could see the white spots on the ground as if something had been dragged from one side of the room to where the crib was, and it stopped right in front of it. My mom checked the closet and called my stepdad. He couldn't leave work, so he stayed downstairs until he got home and checked the crawl space. We have never had animals. It's really difficult for most things to live in Arizona, so wildlife is pretty rare in that area. He didn't find anything, or signs of anything living up there. This happened every other day for 2 weeks. We really didn't know what to make of it. My mom thought it might be the AC suctioning the opening upward. It stopped and didn't happen again for 2.5 years, until my baby sister was born and stayed in the same crib. Again, it happened on and off for a few weeks, and never again. To keep my own solo experiences brief, I had a period of 3 months where I straight up did not sleep. I went crazy. Every night, I felt like my bed was shaking. The instant I laid my head down, it would vibrate, the metal frame would sway, and I would feel as if something was pushing the mattress between the baseboards or sitting on the corner. I had my brother touch the frame one night to tell me if the shaking was in my head or not. He said it wasn't, but I'm still not sure if he wasn't just playing into it. I thought I might be having seizures or something. At one point I got so frustrated I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with the dog. I started hearing whispers too. Not a noise that sounded odd, but someone calling my name. My name has 3 freaking syllables. I would be in my room, door open, doing something at night after my parents went to bed. It was a female voice, but it sounded off. I don't know how to explain it. The downstairs really scared me after the lights went out, so I never went down, but I did walk to the balcony and look. I never saw anything, but the whispering would stop when I got close. My brother started hearing it too. He's kind of weird. His life's dream has been enlisting in the army, so his reaction was always getting his knife and walking right downstairs to confront it. He would turn the lights on and look around before coming right back up. He slept on my floor a few nights because he was convinced that she wanted me. We had prior haunting experiences, which led to my parents making jokes that the ghosts follow us. They didn't pay much attention to it at the time when it was quiet. One night, my parents went out with the babies. My brother and I were in our rooms, doors open per usual. We started hearing something strange. At first, I thought it was the wind. It got louder until it was clear that a woman was wailing. I know it sounds crazy, but it was so clear. We hid in my room for what felt like hours, calling my mom. For some reason, it never occurred to us to call the police. Eventually, the crying stopped. We hatched a plan to run for the stairs and out the nearest door. All of the lights were on in the house, and my brother has his stupid knives. It's like it knew that we were going to leave. We heard shuffling outside the door, and maybe breathing? I guess it could have been the air conditioning. We kind of decided that we were ready to die, unlocked the door, and booked it. The crying started again, and it was very clear that it was coming from my parents' room. We stood outside the property line for another hour, waiting for them to arrive, watching the house. No one could have gotten out without us seeing. We had huge windows lining the upstairs hallway that showed everything with the lights on. My parents again made fun of us, and still do about that night. A few other incidents include my baby brother talking to the man upstairs. He would stand in front of the balcony and chat up to someone. He told us that the man was hiding in my room. He talked about the man in the window and would ask, "Who's that?" directed to the doors at night. I don't want to talk about all of it, but there were so many instances of voices, doors slamming, and things being knocked over in my room that I really did think I was losing my mind. I moved out at 18 and came back occasionally, usually to babysit. Apparently, my reluctant believer mother and absolute skeptic stepdad watched a coffee pot jump off of the counter. They were also outside sitting and having an open fire while drinking a coffee when they saw a figure in the balcony window of our room. It was a tall man, but my stepdad still needed urging to go upstairs. It appeared a second time, closer to where the nursery door was. My mom said she had horrible dreams about a man in the corner of her room after that. She was present for many of the instances where we heard footsteps upstairs, doors slamming when the AC was off, etc., but she always denied that there was anything wrong. Once my parents left town with the kids for a week. At this point I was 19 and living happily an hour away. My mom begged me to check on my brother and stay a few nights for the weekend. I arrived during the evening after I got off of work. I asked how had things been when he was alone. He said he was fine, he just didn't go upstairs at night and, quote-unquote, minded his business. He said if he ignored it and tried not to get scared, then it, in return, ignored him. He felt safe with the dog. We were watching YouTube and eating when we started to hear a deep noise. At first, I thought it was a bike or one of the small buggies that people drove out here. Then, I noticed that it was holding a tune. It was humming. The dog had a weird thing about staring into the bathroom if the door was open, which is scary at night. This time, the door was closed, and he still stood up and stared. The noise was so deep that it sounded as if it couldn't have been human, but it was definitely melodic. There's nothing I could think to figure out to try and explain it. My brother and I just kind of looked at each other. Then, a door slammed upstairs, and we decided to nope out of there and go for a walk. When we got back, I decided that I would sleep in my parents' room. It didn't feel right to stay in the kids' room, but looking back, it would have been best to stay close to my brother. I fell asleep surprisingly easy. I guess about 2 hours passed before my brother slammed the door open. The house smelled like it was burning. Not really like a fire smell, but more like burning plastic and trash. I was panicked. I was the adult and had no idea what to do in that situation. We checked the house. I turned off the air conditioning, thinking it might be on fire. We opened all the windows and fell asleep on the couches downstairs. The next day the smell was still lingering, but less overwhelming. The air conditioner was fine when I turned it back on. Like usual, the day was fine. That next night, my brother and I went on a Jack-in-the-Box run. It might have taken 30 minutes. We arrived home to a mess of blood, vomit, and shit. The dog was sick all over the living room. We immediately took him to an emergency vet, certain that he was dying. They checked him for everything that they could and gave him a clean bill. When we got home, all hell broke loose. My brother and I were cleaning up the mess with the doors open for airflow. There were absolutely insane banging noises coming from upstairs. We hadn't locked up on the way out. My brother thought that someone had snuck in and was trashing the place. He went up to check, and I hung out downstairs ready to call the cops if need be. Nothing happened. Nothing even seemed out of place. We kept cleaning, but the noise started almost immediately. It kind of sounded like someone was shouting behind a wall of cement. I couldn't tell the gender. My brother told me he had been fine until I got there, that I could leave if I wanted. I totally did, and I didn't go back. My parents sold the house this year. During the interim of the move, they stayed in an Airbnb. My brother lived really close to his work, so he stayed in the house with the dog for a few weeks. This story is just his own, so I'm not sure if I believe it. Like I said, he's kind of strange, but he's also not really one to embellish. He had been hearing the usual things, even his name being called in the night, but ignored all of it. His friends had been coming over to keep him company. The last day he was supposed to finish moving, he brought another friend. He says he felt that they were being watched the whole time when they cleared the place out, and his friend left him to lock up. They got into the car facing the house when they noticed that the blinds were open. They were definitely closed on the way out. His friend claims that he saw them open from the corner of his eye. My brother says that there is a woman squatting in front of a downstairs window, close to where he had just left from. She was pale, her nose was hooked, and her hair was black and stringy. Again, classic horror movie ghost. He said she had black eyes with visible white dots in the centers. Inside-out eyes, as he called them, and she was smiling. He says it took him a second of shock to realize that she was looking directly at him. He felt sick, like she could walk right out and get him. They burned rubber when his friend snapped out of it, and they screamed at each other all the way down the road about what they saw. He called me right after to explain it, but I was with my own friends and not really willing to listen at the time. What messes me up is that my mom thought he had a psychotic break. He went into his room and cried all night at the Airbnb. She thought something had happened with his girlfriend. My brother is not a crier. I haven't seen him do that since we were little. When we got together and talked about it, his eyes teared up then, too. He said he didn't know why, but he knew that she wanted to kill him. He drew a picture of her. It's not great, but it still fills me with the deepest foreboding. It took me a while to realize that I saw her too, just once in my bedroom almost 5 years ago. Suddenly it made sense. I knew it didn't feel like a woman, but it felt feminine, like something pretending to be a woman. My ex brought this up today. We dated all through high school and had a few experiences together that she recounts as her only paranormal encounters. I would love to still think that this was my own delusion, but it was shared by way too many people. Maybe a few things can be explained, but most of it truly can't. It has affected me so deeply that I'm still terrified that if I think too much about her, she'll follow us, a state away. This past weekend, my boyfriend came over and we were hanging out downstairs. I soon got tired, so I ended up going upstairs to my bedroom. I immediately felt a presence following me as I walked up the stairs. It felt as if it were following behind me, and there was something breathing on my neck. The feeling when you know that something is there. Me being scared, I refused to look back. I just plop into bed and face the wall, hoping that nothing happens. I still feel like there's something there, but this time it feels like someone is just watching me sleep. Then it starts to get hot. Even though I was scared, I turned to open the window, and there is a holographic type of ghost hovering over my bed. I turn around again, not getting up. I lay there facing my wall, so uncomfortable for a minute or two. I quickly get the courage to open the window and go lay back in bed, but before I get there, my LED TV starts flashing and changing the color mode. Mind, these lights only turn on when the TV is on because they're connected to my TV's USB, and I was unable to turn them on myself when the TV was off. I quickly grabbed the remote and turned it off. Then, all of a sudden, the empty Starbucks cup sitting on my nightstand table falls off in a weird way, as in it looks as if it were being pushed. I turned on my bedroom light, grabbed my phone, and yeeted out of there. I was so terrified. I was home alone on Thanksgiving. It was 2015 around evening time, and I heard some knocking. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking, and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a literal, oh shit, moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I actively started trying to place what was wrong with the situation, and that's when I realized they didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a second I thought, isn't Halloween over? And was confused until the oldest boy made eye contact with me. And that's literally when I felt like I was staring death in the face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew what I was thinking and were actively mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door on them, turned all my lights on, and started watching TV while they stood outside and would occasionally knock. I felt like I lost a good 6 hours of time because I don't even remember when I fell asleep or what I was last watching. I remember when I first sat down, Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was around 2 a.m., and the lights were all off, and there was only static on the TV. I have Dish Network, and there were no power outages in my area, and I don't get static if Dish were to go out. I would get a channel listed as an HDMI and a black screen, or it would be the introduction screen where it would show two people talking about the features of Dish Network. Also, if the lights went out, they would come back on. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times for it to work, but no one was home. After that, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out or something would lose power like my dish. One time my phone that was at 63% dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. After a few months of being afraid of every knock, I decided to call an imam to bless the house. I also saged the house and brought a lot of different surahs, psalms, to put in every room, including the bathrooms. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream and a banging sound on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. A few months ago, maybe 2 or so, my mom and I heard a banging coming from the front door, and same thing. No one was there. I don't know if it was them, or something coming back, or just kids playing a prank, but I was so terrified. I work night shift at a 1920s mental hospital. Obviously, countless people have died here for various reasons. Hangings, murder-suicide beatings, accidental overdose, electroshock therapy, etc. There are 4 floors, with the 4th floor being the well-known hotspot for paranormal activity. Me being security, I have to check it out every once in a while. The 4th floor is essentially an extremely long hallway, approximately 1,800 steps. With housing units, each unit has a 5-inch thick steel door, and there's a window at the very end of the hall. They don't house patients due to the fact that the county took over a while before I started, and it's completely empty by the time 3rd shift rolls around. The 4th floor is also the only floor in the entire complex that is completely off the ground due to the complex being built into a hill. It is also where the electroshock therapy took place a long time ago. This occurrence happened last Wednesday on 3rd shift. I wanted to do a walk through the 4th floor that night around 3 a.m. for no reason other than I was feeling brave. I walk all the way down to the window. Eventually, as I got closer, I started seeing that the window obviously needs cleaning. When I got about 5 feet away, all of a sudden there was a handprint that would have been extremely noticeable from even 15 feet away. I looked at the handprint, turned around, said nope, and walked back down the hall. On my way back from the window, I peek into a side office area with my flashlight just to look. Nothing. Kept going. After a couple seconds, it sounded like someone was running up behind me, so I walked even faster because everything in my body said not to turn around. As I kept walking, I passed by a unit, and as I passed, I heard what sounded like someone punching the door. Put it up to paranoia due to the running I heard prior, that is until I passed another unit. Another loud thud, as if again someone had punched the door. So at this point I start speed walking down the hall, and while I am, I hear footsteps following mine. Mind you, these units are not connected at all, and again, the entire floor is completely empty. That's just one of my experiences. I have also been having dreams of a white, skinny woman in a hospital gown that has black hair with bangs in her face. I always thought she was just a reoccurring person in my dreams, until I talked with one of the CNAs that worked tonight in the kids unit. I never brought her up to the CNA. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I had just explained. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I just explained. I then explained to the CNA in detail about how she looked in my dreams, and she just went pale and her mouth hung open. Supposedly, this ghost is extremely well known throughout the hospital by various people. People have seen her in mirrors, have been locked in bathrooms, and have seen her just walking around. But in my dreams, she always just appears or runs up to me, grabs me, and screams in my face. There was this one dream in particular where I woke up from a dream to wake up in my duplex's stairway. I walk down the stairs, because that's where my bedroom is, and walk into my bedroom. Once in there, I see my bed, my fiancé sleeping on her side of the bed, and myself also sleeping. In front of my closet, which is on my side of the bed, I see that same woman standing next to my body, just staring at me. I walk up to her, and I get the courage to ask her just who the hell she is. She looks at me, grabs me, screams in my face, then shoves me onto my bed, which is when I officially woke up at 3:15 a.m. I have no clue who this woman is at all, but I still dream about her every now and then. Every single dream is in a different place, but she's just there, and this has been going on since I started working at my job. About 10 years ago, I moved into a new home in Indiana with 3 roommates. I won't go into too much detail about where the home is located out of respect for my former roommates, one of which still lives there. I will say that it is located in a very old part of town, a few blocks off of one of the very first main roads that used to be in the town that was settled in 1846, I believe. Anyway, this house was definitely not what comes to mind when you picture a haunted house. It was built sometime in the early 80s or early 90s. It was pretty ordinary looking. 3 bedrooms with a small loft area, tiny bathrooms, and not a whole lot of room for 4 adults to spread out. But when you're a college student in your early 20s and have the opportunity to split rent 4 ways, this seemed perfect. We had all our own tiny little spaces, shared a kitchen and living room, and spent most of our time just bullshitting around the dining room table. The house was owned by an older couple who lived in a city about 20 minutes away. They began renting the home out to help finance their retirement. They were sweet, and pretty relaxed on any rules for the home. They told us right off the bat that they were not physically fit enough to do any maintenance or repairs on the house should anything go wrong, so we were told to call them with any issues, and they would send over their handyman, or whichever professional was needed. They never came to the house. Not once. We paid rent by money order through the mail. I didn't find this strange at the time. The first weird event occurred about a week after we all moved in. We all worked the night shift at our respective jobs, so the house was empty all night and we arrived home around the same time early in the morning. We dragged ass into the living room to enjoy some sort of fast food breakfast before passing out when we realized that the entire carpet downstairs was soaked. A pipe had burst beneath our dishwasher during the night and flooded the kitchen, dining room, and living room. Our landlords had the floor replaced within a week, and we went on with our lives. Then, about a week later, we were baking cookies in the oven when all of a sudden the cookies burst into flames. The oven was producing so much heat that I was afraid that the whole thing would catch on fire. The landlord sent a repairman who told us that something had caused the internal thermometer in the oven to be so uncalibrated that you could set the oven temp to 300 degrees, but it would be more like 475 in there. Again, we had it fixed and moved on. It wasn't long after that when the unexplainable and unnerving activity began. The ceiling fans in the rooms would turn on randomly and they would spin so hard that they would rattle and shake to the point that it looked like the thing was about to fly off of the ceiling. Every room was equipped with button switches. There are 4 buttons on the wall, 1 for the light and the other 3 for various speeds for the fan. The fan would make a 2-tone chiming noise when you would push the button to turn it on. No one would be able to turn on a fan without pretty much everyone in the house hearing this chime. We were creeped out, but chalked it up to faulty wiring or a power surge. That chime still haunts my dreams. Then came the TV issue. We all pulled together to buy a large flat-screen TV for our living room, brand new, name brand, extra warranty. The TV would turn on by itself constantly. We returned it to the store, exchanging it for a new one, and thought it would be fine. We would be outside or in a different room and hear the chime, go turn the fan off, and realize that the TV had just turned itself on. This happened 5 or 6 times a day. It was unable to be ignored. 2 separate things in 2 different rooms turning on almost simultaneously. The electrician was called. He found no signs of faulty wiring, and I think he thought we were making it up. After months of this, we began to hear the whistling. 3 notes whistled by an unseen force at all times during the day. This would usually happen when you were in a room by yourself. I would get this sick, anxious feeling like I was being watched, and right then, I would hear the whistle. Someone or something wanted our attention, and he got it. 3 of us were totally convinced that our house was haunted. Our other roommate was a skeptic, and also pretty much had to make this living situation work, or he would be sleeping in his car. About a year and a half of living in this house, dealing with constant phenomena, it ramped up again. We would be in the kitchen making dinner, go eat in the living room, and come back to find every cabinet door open. Sometimes the refrigerator and oven doors were open too. This happened probably 3 or 4 times a week, on top of all the other crap. I was over it, but had no idea how to fix it. I went to Borders bookstore and got a few books about ghosts and hauntings and different information about getting rid of the creepies in one's home. I decided to do a smudging, and I could not have been more sorry about that decision. We planned to do all the sage smudging together, and our Catholic roommate also had his priest come in and do a house blessing that same day. Holy oil and water were sprinkled in each room, the smell of white sage burning. We thought it was over. The next morning, I was walking downstairs like I had 1,000,000 times before, when my feet completely flew out from under me and I was airborne. I remember thinking, this isn't possible, right before I smashed into the stairs. I landed on my back, right at the edge of them. Picture Lucy pulling the football away before Charlie Brown can kick it, and his tiny feet are kicking in the air. I was Charlie Brown. I landed not on my butt or side, but squarely on my thoracic spine, the upper area of my spine. How on earth did I defy gravity? I had now tripped. I was barefoot on carpeted stairs, sober, and holding the railing. I didn't feel a push. I felt a sweeping force take my legs out from under me. I broke 4 vertebrae in my back, about parallel with my shoulder blades. I've had injections and nerve damage and back braces and a chronic pain that isn't normal for someone in their 20s. I began to look for a new place to live. I found out that I was pregnant with my son about 2 months later, and decided that the risk was too great to live in that house pregnant, so I packed up that night, told my roommates that I would continue to pay my portion of the rent until our lease was up, and moved back in with my parents. I was only staying with my parents for about a month before finding a new safe place for my baby, my now husband, and I. But I lived constantly on edge thinking, what if it followed me? It didn't. What did follow me are the nightmares where I relive the feeling of terror and dread washing over me, and every so often, I can still hear the whistle. I work in a hospital that's run by the Sisters of a Catholic convent. This hospital is pretty old, set almost in the early 1910s. Needless to say, quite a few buildings on the campus are ancient and eerie. No feet. I had night duty a few days back, and since there weren't any patients to attend to, I went to sleep in the room assigned to me in the emergency room itself. A few minutes in, I felt extremely cold. It was the peak of summer, and this coolness just didn't feel right. I got up, switched on the lights, and went out, calling the nursing staff. I told them I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in there tonight. They were more than happy to entertain me for the rest of the evening. One of the staff is a dear friend, and she asked if I wanted to hear a ghost story. I jumped in because now we were a crowd, and there was no reason to be afraid. She told me about this incident in the baby ward. It was the middle of the night. A mother walked up to the nurse's station requesting for a bowl to feed her child. One of the nurses noted down the details, mother's and baby's name, and handed over the bowl. A few seconds later, the same nurse happened to look back and saw that the woman had no feet and was floating away in the air. She pointed to the other sister as well. After recovering from what they had seen, the nurse fired up the system to check the patient's name, and to their surprise, the discharge summary by the baby and mother's name showed up. The mother had died of postpartum hemorrhage after delivering a premature baby, and the baby too had passed away a few days later due to some neonatal infection. C floor. This floor consists of private wards and is pretty posh. There's a call switch for each ward which the patient rings in case they need something, and the bell sounds in the nurse's station. One of my usual nightly duties, I was typing a discharge summary when the bell to Ward 7 rang. The nurses were on break and seemed to not hear it. My senior asked me to go check on it in case it was our patient. I got up and walked through the dark corridor in search of room 7, which was at the end of the hallway. The lights were off, and it seemed like whoever was inside was sleeping. I knocked, but nobody responded. A strange sense of fear crept through me. I ran. I reached the nurse's station. My senior looked up to see me breathing heavily. He asked if I was all right. I told him that the room was dark, and that no one opened at the door when I knocked. The nurses walked in at the same time, and told me that there was no one admitted in Ward 7, and that the bell often rang like that. They wouldn't react unless someone was admitted. SICU bed number 1. The curious case about this bed is that no matter who ends up on it, eventually dies, no matter how young or healthy that the patient is. The incidents have been pretty unnatural over the past few months, and there's no scientific explanation. Just a few days back, a 22-year-old boy was admitted for gallbladder surgery, was shifted to SICU after surgery, and a few hours after shifting, he developed breathlessness and died before intubation. Doctors usually do not like their patients to be assigned to this bed. Even if the SICU is full, as soon as a bed vacates, a patient from number 1 immediately gets assigned a number 2 bed. There's no backstory about this. At least, not that I'm aware of. This story takes place during the late summer in the 1960s in Iowa in a very small farming community. My friend's great-grandpa, Bob, owned a farm out there. He had acres of corn, wheat, potatoes, etc., but corn was his main crop, so he had a huge cornfield. It was around 2 a.m., and his grandfather couldn't sleep, so he went outside to get some fresh air. While outside, he noticed something that looked like a child walking around in the cornfield. So Bob ran back inside and grabbed his double-barrel shotgun and woke the farmhand for backup. They combed through the cornfield in an attempt to find whatever was running around out there. After a while, they still couldn't find anything, so Bob told the farmhand to go back inside the house while he stayed on the porch to watch his cornfield. Then, as he looks at the gravel road between his yard and the fence line that led to the cornfield, standing on the road was a little girl around 6 years old or so, and she was wearing a white dress that made her look like she had just gotten out of church. Bob thought that his mind must have been playing tricks on him, so he tried to lay down on the couch to rest, but also stay somewhat alert. However, not even a minute after he laid down, he heard a knock on the screen door. He walked up to the door and slightly cracked the main door open. He saw the little girl and asked, "May I help you?" The little girl said, "Mister, I'm lost, and I don't know where my parents are. Can I come in the house and use your telephone?" Bob felt uneasy, and told her that he could get her a glass of water and that he can call her parents for her if she gave him the number, but he didn't feel comfortable allowing her in his home. He felt something off about the little girl. However, the little girl insisted to be the one to call and talk to them. And Bob said, "Young lady, it's 2 a.m, and I don't feel right letting a stranger into the house, little girl or not." The little girl started to get agitated and said, "I'm not leaving until you let me in to use your phone." Startled, Bob told the little girl that he was going to call the police to come pick her up so that they could keep her safe and find her parents. He closed the door to go and call the police, and he heard someone punch the door like a grown man. He walked back and cracked the door open again, but when he looked, he realized that it was still the little girl, and that she was the one who had punched the door. But when he looked at her this time, she didn't have any eyes. Instead, she had pitch black orbs instead of eyes, and she said in a deep voice, "Let me in." Bob grabbed his shotgun and pointed it at the little girl and told her no and to go away. After this, the little girl looked right into the barrel and then back up at Bob, smiled smugly at him, and giggled. before she ran back into the cornfield and disappeared. I have an attic in my house, and ever since I was young, I hated going up there. It was dark, because there was no light, and it was always absolutely freezing. It had a really bad energy, and my anxiety would skyrocket whenever I had to go up there with my dad. It felt like someone had set a timer, and time was running out, if that makes sense. It was like I had to get out of there ASAP, or something would happen. In 2016, my parents decided to convert the attic and make it into their bedroom. After this happened, I noticed a lot of unexplainable events. One day, I was off from school and I was home alone. I was lying on my bed watching Jeremy Kyle's show clips with both of my cats on the bed with me. Then I heard what sounded like someone walking down the stairs from the attic. It's a very distinct sound, and I knew it was the stairs creaking as they were new and didn't normally make any noise. I paused the video and listened. I didn't hear anything, so I continued watching, now a little on edge. 2 minutes later, I heard the footsteps again. Peanut, my cat, started hissing and meowing and went to the end of my bed and hid. At this point, I was tearing up. I somehow managed to get out of bed and pull my dresser in front of my door. I sat in front of the door and called my dad, sobbing. I explained to him what was happening and he said, "Go out of my room and look." Hell no. I begged him to call my neighbors to come in and get me. It was only after I called my dad 5 times, he kept hanging up on me, that he called my neighbors. One of my neighbors, who have a key, came in. I flew down the stairs, sobbing and shaking. My neighbor checked the house, but no one was there. I didn't feel safe staying home for weeks after this. My best friend and I would hang out after school at my house most days, and whenever we did, we would always hear noises from upstairs. One time in particular, we were in the kitchen making noodles, and we heard banging. I assumed it was my cat and didn't think much of it. My friend then shushed me and said to listen. From upstairs, I could hear the sound of someone opening and closing a chest of drawers and slamming my wardrobe open and shut. Now my cats are loud, but how on earth does a cat open up a drawer? It's a very distinct sound. We ended up waiting in my back garden holding a paint scraper and a knife until my dad came home. This is by far one of the scariest ones. My dad called up the stairs to me and said he was going to the shops. Once he left, I went downstairs to grab some food. I asked my sister if she wanted anything to eat, and she said yes. She was in the front room, so I was talking to her from the kitchen. My dad knocked on the door, and I yelled at her to get it. She didn't. I went to answer it, giving it to her for being lazy. When I opened the door, in came my dad and my sister. After months of noises, banging, hearing people talking and walking around when I was home alone, I was sick of it. I felt anxious to be in my own home, and I had other things to worry about. So one day I decided to try to talk to whatever it was that was in my house. I didn't use a Ouija board. I just sat on my stairs and had a chat, I guess. I told him that I respect that they were in this house before I was, but that they were scaring me and stressing me out. I asked if they would be able to leave or at least stop frightening me. After this, I've never had anything happen in my house. No banging or noises. I think that it was the spirits of the previous owners, a nice elderly couple who sadly died in the house of natural causes. For a little background, my mother has been in a long-term nursing facility since March, with some serious but stable health issues. Then there was a virus outbreak in her facility, and she was diagnosed with it. I of course worried for her condition as she began to decline rather quickly over the beginning of last week. Last Wednesday, I switched off my light at 10 p.m. like most nights, rolled over, and began to doze off. Typically when I'm dozing, my mind will follow some random train of thought that will lead me off into snooze land. That night, as I was dozing, I envisioned my mother walking into my late father's arms, being hugged by my older brother who had died 9 years ago, and having my grandparents and aunt gather around her while being hugged by my father. Then the phone woke me up at 10:30 p.m. The hospice nurse called to tell me that my mother had passed away at 10:15. I like to think that I was seeing her entry into heaven, with my family's love and long-missed affection return to bring her to happiness. For years, I've dealt with the disappearing object phenomenon, but lately, items have started appearing or reappearing as well. Just this morning, for example, I woke up and went into my kitchen to make coffee, and a random pack of paper coffee cups was sitting in the middle of my kitchen counter. No one else lives here or has access to my house, and I always set an alarm at night, so I would hear it if someone had tried to get in. I literally have no clue where this pack of coffee cups came from. It just appeared out of thin air. I'm grateful in a way, because it sure was convenient to have the cups this morning, but still, who put them there? I even checked my Amazon history to see if somehow I bought these without remembering, but no such purchase was there. I've had other objects randomly appear in my bathroom too. Lip glosses that aren't in a color that I would normally buy. I've had strange food items that I didn't buy appear in my pantry too. Boxed soups, ketchup, I don't even like it. Mustard, don't use it that much. And a random bottle of soy sauce. I don't even know what to think about this. I worked at a small, old hospital for a couple of years. 4 floors, only 2 floors being used, and a small ER. I was a med-surg RN working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Med-surg meant that we had patients who just had surgery, and also patients who were just sick. Most of the patients were elderly and just sick with things like pneumonia, anemia, acute kidney failure, etc. When older folks get sick, they tend to get confused and might do or say things that they normally wouldn't. But this, whatever the hell it was not cool. This was mortifying, and I'm the only one who heard it. We joked that because the hospital was so old that it was creepy, specifically on the right wing of our unit, and obviously at night. Guess who got assigned the right wing that night? I got bedtime meds ready for the old folks down there, and started walking down the hall with my med cart and charts for each patient. I'd received report from the previous day's RN that room 214 was a woman, call her Kathy, who was only 55 and in for pneumonia, completely alert and oriented. I give the patients down there their meds one by one, and yeah, I'm tired and mildly annoyed that it takes room 216 over 10 minutes to swallow a plethora of pills one by one, and then proceeded to pull out his IV that was delivering his antibiotics. I digress. So needless to say, it took me a little bit longer to get to room 214. She didn't seem upset, just tired. I did my assessment, and she was, in fact, oriented to day, time, name, and location. I said goodnight after hanging another bag of fluids. I'm hanging out in the hall with my computer documenting my assessments, and I hear something that shook me. It sounded like whispering, but I heard more than one person doing it. I cocked my head up to hear better. I mean, it's night shift and I'm tired, so I'm making sure that I actually did hear this. I followed the noise to the outside of Kathy's room, and there seems to be a full-blown whispery conversation going on with multiple people. I couldn't make out what the different voices were saying, but it sounded like chanting of some sort. I had to make sure that I was legitimately hearing these whispers that seemed like they were coming from different people and try to make sense of it. I walked slowly past her door, which was slightly cracked open. Hoping to hear things more clearly, the whisper chanting sounds only got louder, but were still unintelligible. Kathy, who had been tucked in bed and dozing off when I saw her less than 7 minutes ago, was now sitting straight up on the side of her bed, looking away from me at the wall. Doesn't sound that scary, right? Well, Kathy was unable to lift herself out of bed without assistance during my assessment. She was having labored breathing when I assessed her. Now Kathy has pulled her nasal cannula out of her nose, that plastic thing that goes around your face that has the 2 spouts that go up your nose to give you extra oxygen, and sat up in bed in less than 7 minutes without struggle, and then she stood up, still looking away. She turned and walked to the bathroom, still without seeing me. Because she was labeled a fall risk, she shouldn't be out of bed alone. I saw her profile, and her lips were not moving. But the whispers grew louder. I panicked, but kept my cool. I briskly walked to the nurse's station and asked if a nursing assistant could please help Kathy with the restroom. I normally would do it myself, but I was rather busy and Kathy was doing quite well on her own. I was sweating, freaking out, and getting further behind on my charting. The nursing aide helped Kathy and didn't report anything unusual when I asked her how she was doing. I swear I heard those voices. They were unsettling, to say the least. I requested the left wing as often as possible after that, and eventually went on to work at a larger hospital. I'm not saying we have a ghost, spook, or spirit, but something phenomenological is definitely happening in our home. The brief background on the home is that it's over 70 years old in an older part of our town. The previous resident was a well-respected attorney in the area, and he died here. We wouldn't learn this until after we moved in. The house was almost completely dismantled and rebuilt with new everything. Paint, electric, plumbing, drywall, etc. 1 floor, not a whole lot of square footage. An attic that has about 2.5 feet of clearance. Not long after getting moved in, my wife and I learned a little bit more about the house's history, and that the previous owner had passed away, and that it was quite some time after his death before he was discovered. We made peace with this information and continued settling in. The first peculiar incident wasn't really that peculiar. It had been well over a year since the previous owner passed, but he kept receiving mail. A lot of mail. Fun mail, too. Magazines and newspapers with the subscriptions renewing. We remarked on the mail as being merely interesting, and for the sake of creating a tradition, we always kept the old attorney's mail for a day or two, in case he just wanted to read it. Eventually, this would trickle to a stop. The second peculiar incident caught our attention. After 2 months of being in the house, we decided to get newer, better locks for the doors. I had a new key, my wife had a new key. 2 extra keys went on the key hook. A few days go by, and my wife asked me if I had lost my key or if I had trouble locking or unlocking the door. I hadn't. She showed me the 2 extra keys. Both were still on the wire ring, and both had bends of about 15 degrees right at the key shoulder. We agreed that this was odd, but we let it go with some loose rationalizations. The third peculiar incident started a little over 2 years ago, and continues still. Neither I nor my wife smoke. However, about once every 2 weeks on a random day, and usually after midnight, the distinct odor of warm cigarette smoke can be smelled in our living room. At first, we thought it was someone walking nearby, or a neighbor, or an odd or unfortunate combination of smells from a garbage can. We got some cameras, and pointed them outside to see what we could see. Nothing. The last time we smelled cigarettes was about 2 weeks ago. And we've had electricians check our wiring on unrelated matters just in case. The fourth incident relates to the second. 2 metal spoons in the silverware drawer were bent. almost snapped. Aside from the cigarette smoke, it's been a while since anything has happened, until last week. For whatever reason, the attorney's mail is resumed and the fifth peculiar incident has occurred. I work out in the woods, and my wife now works from home in the company of our 2 cats. In a flurry of texts and phone calls, she told me that it sounded like someone was running around upstairs, as if they were rushing across the house to answer the phone, was how she described it. We've had squirrels in our useless attic and the occasional tree branch. The footsteps exceeded both of those. The sixth and most recent peculiar incident is equal parts mundane and intriguing. We have a favorite spatula. Yes, we do. Some of you reading this probably have your own favorite spatula, spoon, fork, pot, pan as well. We used the bright robin's egg blue utensil to make our Thanksgiving dinner and set it aside with the rest of the cooking detritus. That evening, and the following morning, the kitchen is cleaned and everything is put away. Sunday began the greater holiday baking season, requiring the favorite spatula. Except, it was missing. The ceramic container where the utensils are stored has everything else. Red things, green things, metal things, wooden things. Visual inspection of the surrounding area results in zilch. Every cupboard and drawer, opened and investigated, to nothing. We sadly conclude that after the big cleanup, it must have ended up in the trash. So we began an online hunt for its replacement. On Friday last, I get a picture of the utensils sitting quite happily amongst all the others. I was confused by this, since the evening before we had to use other tools instead of the missing spatula because it was missing. So, sometime after 9:30 p.m. Thursday and 7:18 a.m. on Friday, something that was missing for at least 5 days returned. So, here it is in order. 1. A confluence of strange coincidences. 2. Sleepwalking. 3. Someone is managing to live in our attic. 4. That I and my wife are in a weirdly mutual prank cycle. Or 5. Something real is happening. If you have any ideas, tests, solutions, resources, or suggestions, I'm listening. Nothing seems malvoyant about what's been happening, but it's definitely happening. I want to start this off by saying that I only talk about this because it's part of my healing process and helps me to deal with the trauma of losing my infant son. In 2007, I was 9 months pregnant with my last child. I had had preeclampsia with previous pregnancies and a placenta abruption with a pregnancy 7 years prior, so I was being monitored very closely. Not as closely as I should have been, but that's another story for another time. The evening of December 12th, I became ill. I felt dreadful, and looked at my abdomen and thought that it looked rigid and strange. Instantly, I knew that I was dying. I can't explain it, but simultaneously I heard a whisper in my left ear, a soft, gentle whisper that said, "The baby has died." I instantly thought I was losing my mind, and yelled at my son to call 911. We were in the middle of a winter storm, so our phones were dead. I finally got a neighbor to call my husband, who took me to the maternity ward of a large hospital. One of the most experienced nurses happened to be on duty, thank goodness, because I coded when I got to the floor. I'd had a 3rd-degree abruption. 4th degree is death. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and had to go on dialysis for a while. My ammonia levels were high, so for quite a bit I thought that I had given birth. I did get to hold him. He was beautiful, with dark curls. When I got to the medical surgery floor, I was coherent and trying to come to grips about why this had happened to me. One night, I had awoken to voices. I thought it was my family in my room. My eyes were closed, but I was awake and heard what sounded like 20 people talking to me. I was lying there, trying to understand what they were saying about me, but all the people were talking so fast and in a hushed tone. I opened my eyes to find no one there. Not one soul. What scared me was that as I opened my eyes, one person said, "Shh." A second person said, "Shh." Then there was a collective, "Shh." I was terrified, in a dark room with the door shut, and I had a hard time moving around because of my emergency C-section incision. I started calling for my husband. He didn't answer. He would often sleep on the floor, beside my bed on a pull-out sofa chair. Suddenly, a small olive-toned girl of 6 or 7 appeared beside my bed. She had 2 curly ponytails, and was dressed in 1970s type clothing. I could not see her eyes, just dark shadows. She pointed to the other side of my bed and said, "He's over there." My husband had been on the left side of my hospital bed and was asleep. I turned back to face her, and she was gone. Having that experience in the hospital helped change my insight about death. I know that I will see my infant son again one day. I also think that the people's voices I heard may have been people that had passed away at that hospital, as well as the little girl. I felt no threat at all, but was frightened because this was so unexpected. One early summer morning in 2000, I got up and ready to drive my mom to her job at a local retirement home. It was dark starting out, but the sun was gradually coming up. I dropped her off and started returning to her house. Halfway back, driving on a country road densely populated with trees and houses, I noticed a car coming because I could see its high-beaming lights from a short distance. I also saw a large, jet-black dog in my path, standing completely still with its head pointed forward. It had a slender build. Having only a few seconds to think, I decided to continue forward and brace for the impact from running into its body. I closed my eyes as I got the closest to it, and continued to drive without swerving, and to my surprise, I felt nothing. I slowed down to check for the dog, but there was absolutely nothing back there. As I continued my drive, I felt strange because there was no way that I would have missed that animal. It was not facing me. It was facing right. I would have struck it broadside. Anyway, I'm thankful I didn't swerve. I feel like had I swerved, things would have been very much different for me today. I do believe that I could have died. I woke up in bed, and next to me I could see a man lying there with no distinctive facial features except for brown, darkish hair. He got up and moved to the side of my hospital bed and sat in front of me. He said to me, "You're going to die soon." I asked when, but he didn't respond, and I got up and locked myself in the bathroom. I've still never figured out what they meant, or who they were. I wasn't on any medication that would bring on any hallucinations or anything like this, but this has not happened before or since. My mom and I moved into a house when I was in the 5th grade. For the record, I'm 25 now. And there was a room in the attic that looked like it was actually built to be part of the house and not some makeshift DIY room. The attic was also not your typical attic with a pull-down door, but a walk-through door. Anyway, the layout was that it made an L shape, and all wooden, and the room was obvious at the end of the L. We used the attic for Christmas decorations and whatnot. But anyhow, on with the story. I turned the room into my little hangout area. The only thing in there when we moved in was a wooden table with 4 chairs and then some weird bench that I hear was a bed, but it didn't look big enough. So me and my friends would always go in there to hang out, play games, and whatnot. Well, one day I accidentally broke the table and was worried that my mom was going to be mad at me. I don't think she would have cared since the stuff was so old. But out of fear, I just grabbed all the stuff that I owned and left the room, closing the door behind me. I think I remember once going back in there a few years later, like 9th grade maybe, but never actually spent an extended period of time. I would always stack the Christmas decorations in front of the wall and door to it. The year before we moved, we decided to move everything into the garage after Christmas for my senior year in high school. That way we didn't have to deal with it when the movers showed up. We never used the garage anyway, but got rid of lots of stuff the year prior, so we had plenty of room. That was the last official time I saw the door. But the absolute last time I stepped foot in that house, the stuff was all packed away, on the truck preparing to leave, and I was doing one last walkthrough when I decided to go into that room and make sure that I didn't forget anything and leave it behind. I went to go to the attic, and it was missing. Nothing but a blank wall. Like there was no way a room could have ever even have been there. I was shocked and asked my mom, but she had no idea. I even called my friends to verify, and yeah, they all remembered the room, but she didn't. It was odd. Very odd. I never felt anything weird about the room at all. Like, I'm pretty sensitive to paranormal stuff, and this just seemed like some random room. The house, in my opinion, was haunted because a guy hung himself in the living room, but I don't believe that was connected. A few years ago, I was still in high school, and out of my own curiosity, I tried to lucid dream. I started recording dreams for a month as soon as I woke up. I had all of them written out on a big notepad, but I never really got it to work. Anyway, one night I had a dream where a friend came to me right before I woke up, and the only thing that happened was him telling me something bad is gonna happen soon. A few days later, I completely forgot about this, but the same friend in real life keeps acting really just down in the dumps. I asked him what's wrong, and he said it's just a bummer because his uncle had a heart attack and he's worried about him. To add to it, I get a call later that day telling me that my uncle also had a heart attack on the same day and died. At that point, I had to break this weird story to him. Premonition, or just pretty creepy coincidence? He believes the story, even though I would have been skeptical. A couple of years ago, I worked at a hospital as security, and part of security duties for the second shift was to lock all doors downstairs in the basement of the hospital. The type of things down there ranged from offices, supply rooms, bathrooms, and the morgue. We would also have to check the refrigeration temp inside the morgue to make sure it was running properly, but that's not important. So one night I go down to the basement, which is basically a big rectangle, locked all the doors, and just as I was going to make a right to take the stairs up, I noticed someone walk out of the corner in what looked like blue scrubs. They took about 5 steps into one of the doors I had locked. They didn't open the door or anything, just walked right through. As security, I couldn't just brush it off because recently we had people steal from the supply room, so I had to check it out, especially since it was after hours. As I walked up to the door, I immediately got goosebumps because this specific door was 1, an automatic locking door that can only be accessed by ID clearance, and 2, I didn't see the individual pull out an ID, which you have to get in. You pull out the ID, scan, and wait for the green light to pop up to open the door. I literally just saw someone take about 5 steps into the door like it was open wide, which it wasn't. The door automatically locks and closes itself. I think to myself, well, if someone accessed the door after hours, they aren't allowed to, so this might be the person that's stealing stuff. If a nurse or someone needs to go to the supply room, they call security, and security escorts them because of stealing incidents. So I pull out my ID, scan it, and open the door. I walked in and saw nobody. Then I opened all the closet doors to confirm that nobody was hiding, and then immediately got the F out, because I was 100% sure that I had just seen a ghost. Later that night, I got a call from the ER department to escort a nurse down to the supply room. When I escorted her down there, into the supply room and told her what I had seen, she shuffled through some boxes in the supply room and pulled out the same exact blue scrubs that I had seen the ghost wearing. Except they weren't scrubs. They were the blue gowns that patients wear inside the hospital. So what I had actually seen that night was a patient's ghost walking around the basement. After this experience, I definitely believe in ghosts and the afterlife. To this day, I kick myself for not looking at the cameras that night. So I always struggled with sleep paralysis, but one time, maybe 3 years ago, I woke up from my sleep, but I wasn't able to move at all. I saw a very slim, abnormally tall, black figure in the corner of my room. I looked at him. He was looking at me, his face down. When I looked at him, he just calmly walked away from my room, and I woke up. To this day, I still think about it. And I found out thousands of people all around the world see the exact same thing. I can't believe it's all psychological. How can everyone see the same thing? From China to Ireland, USA to Turkey? It doesn't make sense. I think that we all may have witnessed something otherworldly. Back in the early 2000s when I was a kid, there was a deserted section of the local hospital waiting to be torn down and rebuilt. My friends and I thought that it would be a fantastic idea to climb onto the roof and practice our parkour skills. After about 30 minutes, one of my friends stood on a skylight and it gave out from under him. He only just managed to grab onto the ledge, which stopped him from falling in. Myself and my other friend then rushed over and grabbed his hands to start pulling him up when we noticed a little girl standing on a chair directly in the moonlight, looking up and waving. We pulled our friend to safety and quickly looked back over the side to find that the little girl was gone and the chair was on its side. We all left pretty quickly after that. All of us were shocked. We later discovered that that part of the hospital was used to treat burn victims, and a 6-year-old girl had once died there. I've worked 3.5 years now as a psych tech at a unit that covers the southeast portion of my state. The unit I work on you can think of as the ER for psych. We admit individuals who are having mental breaks or who need help for self-harm, being disabled from their psych disorder, or harming others. The unit is freaking old, and has been around since the time of Moses, it seems. Even though weird events go on, it's a pretty awesome job helping others, and I love working here while I finish going to school. I will say to start out with, that most nights on the unit are really quite boring. Naturally, with the type of individuals that can stay here, the unit can have a change in its feeling rather quickly, though. I've had individuals who I've never met before know strange things about me or other patients, such as where I've buried my dogs, names of family members, or the streets that I've grown up on. You'll get a weird vibe walking by certain patients. At times, my patients will say creepy stuff, such as being told the devil has sent its demons to watch me and not mess up. I witnessed a lady who came in for suicidal thoughts slowly progress to sitting in a corner and screaming "no, stop" till she couldn't talk. This lady shouted and shrieked the same phrases over and over in an empty room. The unit also has one room that I dislike because no matter who gets assigned to stay in that room, they always seem to get much worse before they get better. The room is always cold, even when the heat comes through the vent. I can recall 4 patients asking to switch rooms because the shadows in the room surround them when they sleep and buzz at them at night. My most recent experience was while doing my safety check in an unoccupied room which had the door open. Previously in the shift I knew it was locked because I had checked all the unused rooms to make sure that they were indeed closed and locked. I thought housekeeping had come up to clean the room possibly, since a patient was discharged from in there the night before. Next thing I knew, I had a soap bar and a shampoo bottle thrown at me. It wasn't a joke throw either, but a rip right at me. The door slammed shut. I think a patient is in there now. I open the door to a completely empty, clean room. I lock it up, pick up the soaps, and try to tell the other tech that I'm working with what had happened. We pull up the camera and sure enough you can watch that event unfold in the hall. Not all experiences are bad or evil on the unit. The patients will sometimes tell me that they had family that's passed on stay the night in their room and visit with them until they fall asleep. Another time I had one patient tell me that a giant white figure stood guard by their door and kept the shadow figures from coming in until they were finally able to doze off. We do have regular figures that walk the yard and hang out in the rooms. One we call the engineer because the figure is always being seen in the utility closet. The mysterious stranger resembles a character out of a game. He's a tall guy in a tannish trench coat and business hat walking the same path around 3 a.m. and disappears after he passes by a big elm tree. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. On my 4th meal break, I usually eat and do a little working out. The gym also has a radio to hook up your phone to and to jam some music. This particular time, I'm shooting hoops and listening to Metallica. My break ends, so I put the ball away and unplug my phone to leave. As the music cuts, I hear a soft voice say, "Keep playing." Similar story from a coworker from the same place. When she turned the music off, she heard someone picking up singing where the song had stopped. Apparently, they also enjoy music just as much as the rest of us. I was working at this hospital called Warren General in Warren, Pennsylvania, about 90 minutes east of Erie, Pennsylvania. I worked night shift. I'm a travel RN, so this was one of the hospitals that I traveled to. One night my floor was slow, so I got pulled down to the CCU to work. Well, that night my patient rang her call bell at 3 o'clock in the morning and she asked me, "What does she want?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The nurse keeps coming in here and standing there in that corner," and she points to the corner behind the door. So I was like, "Who, Ashley?" That was the nurse I was working with, and I pointed to her because she was sitting at the nurse's station on the computer, and the woman says, "No, the other one." Well, there was no other one. It was just us two. And FYI, the patient was a woman in her 50s and didn't have any history of mental illness and was not taking any meds that would make her hallucinate. I kind of laughed, and I was like, "It's just us." And she just stares at me, so I say, "Okay, if she does it again, just yell for me and I'll come right in." Her room was 8 feet in front of the nurse station. About half an hour goes by, and she yells, "See, there you go again." I got up, started walking. I hear the bathroom door shut. It had been cracked open just a little bit to give her dark room a little light. I walk in and I say, "See, you're dreaming. There's no one else in here." She says, "No, she went in the bathroom." I open the door and the lights are still on, but no one is in there. Looking confused, I say, what does she look like? Because I thought that someone was messing around. It's too dark to tell. I can tell it's a woman, but she's so dark that I can't really make her face out. When she says that, I get a little weirded out. But the night ends and I forget about it. 3 months go by. I get pulled back down to the same unit. I have the same room as before. This time a man in his early 60s in the patient room. Nice guy, alert and oriented and very polite. Night is going good. It's about 3 a.m. and his call light goes off, which means he needs something. So I walk in and he says to me, "You are my nurse, right?" And I nod my head. And he says, "Well, why does that lady keep coming in here and standing in that corner? What is she doing?" What? I almost crapped my pants instantly. This was 3 months later. Same room, same thing. I said to him, "Honestly, I think it's a ghost, sir." And he laughs. And I say, "You're not the first person to say that." I started telling everyone about it. And then I find out that the entire second floor has a nurse that's seen every once in a while. I guess in the 1990s, a nurse who worked there committed suicide. She shot herself to death in the second floor bathroom. In 2011, my older cousin bought a small, 2-bedroom, single house in a quiet neighborhood for retired folks. The house was very small, with only 850 square feet of interior space, but it sat on a large plot of land. We could have easily fit 2 more houses like it on that lot, and still would have nice leftover space for yards and gardening. I was still a college student at that time, and I lived with my cousin. When he bought the house, I moved in with him. There were the 2 of us living there. According to the real estate agent, the house had been abandoned for around 3 years. The previous owner basically left it unmaintained and moved to a different state. The house had 1 main floor, a small attic, and an unfinished basement. The first time we walked in, the floorboards were already rotted out. We could see the basement through them. Everything was in horrible condition, and we would have to do major restoration to make it livable again. The property also had a small storage shed in the back of the lot. My cousin got a great offer, so he took the deal without much hesitation. Weird things started to happen when we began our restoration work. One day we were working on the bathroom. My cousin told me that he had to go to Home Depot for some stuff, and so he left. I heard him open the door, go outside, close it, turn on his car, and drive away. I was taking apart the old boards that were nailed on the bathroom walls. My back was facing the bathroom door. 5 minutes after my cousin left, the bathroom door, which was open, started to slowly move to the closed position. I knew this because I could hear the creaky old door sound that it made. I turned around and saw the door continue to close on its own. Then it stopped just as it touched the door frame and bounced back a little. I thought maybe it's just the wind. Then, suddenly the door pulled itself shut tightly, as if there was someone on the other side of the door. It happened right in front of me. I was only 4 feet away. No wind could have done that. Plus, all the windows were closed around the house, so there couldn't possibly be any form of breeze. You might think that maybe the AC caused it, but no. This old house did not have central AC. We had to put in window AC units afterward. At this point, I thought my cousin was messing with me, so I called out to him, but there was no response. Just silence. I opened the door, continued to call for him, telling him to stop playing around. But my cousin was not there. I checked the parking lot, and he was, in fact, gone. I even got outside and did a perimeter check, but no one was there, and I still cannot explain what happened. After the restoration was done, we moved in. My cousin sometimes went on business trips for weeks, and there would just be me in the house. The following happened whenever I was alone. One night I was studying and had my headphones on. I heard sounds of someone walking around in the basement, which was directly below my bedroom. It sounded like they had slippers on, and I could hear the sound of them dragging on the concrete floor with each step. What's weird was that I could not pinpoint exactly which direction in which it was coming from. It's a strange sensation when the sounds were coming from the back of my head, as if they were just right behind me. The only reason that made me think that it's the basement was because the basement was the only area in the house that had concrete and that could have made the concrete slipper dragging sound. So I took out my headphones, and the sounds of the footsteps still went on. The volume of the sounds stayed the same with or without the headphones. I thought my cousin had come home early, so I called out to him and got no reply. I took the flashlight and went to the basement to check it out. It was dark and quiet. No one else was there. This happened 3 or 4 more times within the first 2 months that I lived in that house. After that, I didn't experience anything unusual anymore. My cousin never felt or saw anything weird, but he seemed interested in my stories. His girlfriend, now wife, who had been to the house every other week or so, also expressed her uneasy feelings during her stays. By 2016, during a thunderstorm, the thunder struck our storage shed in the backyard and burned everything inside it. Luckily, the house was untouched. I came home from work only to find a police officer waiting at the front. He told me what had happened and said that it was an act of God and that our insurance would compensate for the loss. In our Asian culture, people say that when thunder strikes somewhere, often it is to strike down a malevolent force or spirit. We quickly formed the realization that this thunder strike was more than just an accident. I got my own place and moved out a few months after the fire. My cousin bought another house with his wife a year after that. He still owns the creepy house, and it's been left unoccupied since 2017. He plans to tear down the old house and build a larger one to take advantage of the large plot of land. The experiences at this house were the closest I've got to what could be considered paranormal. My mom and grandma have had similar experiences with premonitions, but I am now 21 and have been having them for the first time in my own life recently. A few weeks ago, I had a very vivid dream about my childhood best friend who I haven't seen or spoken to in years, and I woke up the next day to find out that she had committed suicide. Then this past week, I told my boyfriend that I missed our old coworker, who we also haven't seen or spoken to in a few years. And come to find out, he suddenly dropped dead about 15 minutes before I had made that comment. Today I took a nap and had another very vivid dream, very lucid, about my high school boyfriend. And now I'm a little bit freaked out, and I'll definitely be watching his social media over the coming days, hoping that this has just been a weird coincidence. My family and I moved into a new house. It used to have an attic, but it's been sealed off. After a couple of months into living in this house, sometimes I'm just watching TV and I hear scratching from the roof. I just play it off as a bird, as they're common where I live. After 3 weeks, the scratching has gotten worse and more frequent. It's like it's trying to scratch its way out of the roof. By the way, the attic entrance thing is above the outside of my sister's room. One day my sister tells my dad that the seal is open. My dad gets confused because it was supposed to be sealed off completely. My dad goes to close it and realizes that it's really hard to open and close, so whatever opened it was strong. That's when I start to get skeptical. The same night I go to get some snacks from the fridge, I open it to find out that they are all gone. I thought my siblings must have eaten them. In the morning, my parents are going on about a missing cake. The cake was supposed to be for my niece's birthday. They asked if I had anything to do with it, and I said no, along with all my other siblings. I was getting really suspicious about the attic, so I built up the courage to go and check it out. Note that I am probably the most paranoid person in the world, so I was scared for my life, but my curiosity got the best of me. I get the ladder, a torch, and a knife just in case. I open the entrance. I shine my torch to see nothing, but as I search more, I see the cake, empty snack packets, dirty clothes, and a short, dark silhouette. It just freezes in place. Immediately, I bolt and scream for my parents and tell them everything. They tell me to stay in my room. They go up and check, but there was no one there. I'm still shaken from that moment and get nightmares from it. We have since moved from that home and now live a normal, non-scary life. This happened to me a few months ago. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was on my back, and there was a man standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me. He was wearing black. He looked very calm. I think he was floating because he was high up in the air. I have always been freaked out about ghosts, but for some reason I did not panic, and I just stared back at him for a few seconds. After he seemed to realize that I was awake, he was surprised and appeared nervous. He then turned away as if he was leaving and disappeared. I never had any experiences with sleep paralysis, so I don't think that this was the reason that this happened. Also, my dog was sleeping next to me, and she did not wake up. Even after he left, I was not afraid. I truly do not understand why. Setting: hospital, medical surgery floor. Profession: staff nurse. This happened yesterday, and I have 2 nursing students as living proof. We basically carry those indestructible Nokia cell phones around at work. If you hit the call bell, they ring to the aide's phone first, then it bounces to my phone. Yesterday, a call bell came in from an all-female room. My phone put itself on speakerphone and answered itself. A male voice repeated on a loop with a 4 to 5 second delay, "Are you there?" At the time, I was giving a report to 2 nursing students, 1 male, 1 female. The incident happened after we had just started talking about near-death experiences. We all went white and got goosebumps. The female student said, "Well, you're haunted." It was unbelievable. The male student calmly said, "Yes, we are here." This had never happened before. Those phones don't repeat. Absolutely amazing. I went into the room later and opened the window and told him he was dead and that he needed to move on. What an experience for the students. This has never happened to me before, but I hope it happens again, and that I have the courage to do what the male student did. When I, a 24-year-old female, was younger, around 5, my family moved into an old house on the upstairs floor. An older couple lived below us. This was a long time ago, and I was really little, but I remember this all so vividly. When we were first moving in, my mom had to go up to the attic, which, coincidentally, the door was in what would be my room. She took me and my younger brother up with her because I'm assuming she didn't want to leave us unsupervised. I remember not liking it up there, and then the light turned off. Both my brother and I started screaming about red eyes. I do remember them. It wasn't just one. It was a bunch or a few. I couldn't tell you how many. It turns out that the light turning off was my dad because he didn't think anyone was up there. He turned the light back on and asked what was going on, and me and my brother were still hysterical. The thing is, no one remembers this but me. Not even my brother. I chalk it up to a bad nightmare, except for the fact that I remember every detail. And it turns out a mother had drowned her baby in that attic, and my parents had experiences there as well. I feel like that house was the start of my acknowledgement or awareness of the paranormal. So about 15 years ago, I was living with my ex-girlfriend, my sister, and her husband in an old house not far from town. Within the first few weeks of living there, strange things were happening regularly. Lights going out randomly, noises upstairs. At one point, one of the windows at the back of the house was cut. Like someone had went in with glass cutters trying to break in, but gave up on it and left. Creepy stuff like that. That was bad enough, but things got pretty severe as time went on. One week in particular was truly insane. The first thing that happened that week was on a Tuesday night. Everyone was working, and I was home alone watching TV when I noticed that our cat was acting really weird, backed into a corner, and arched up as though she was scared. When I went to get up, the electricity went out in the house, and it was pitch black inside. The second that happened, I heard really loud footsteps running down the stairs toward me. I got up and braced myself for whatever it was, but there was nothing. I gathered myself and went outside to the front garden to check if the other houses' lights were on, but my house was the only one that was dark. I went to the fuse box to reset the trip switch, and all was back to normal. A few days later, I think it was a Tuesday, we were all sitting in the living room watching a movie and eating a pizza. The lights were on, there was a good atmosphere in the house, when out of nowhere, a massive bang happened upstairs. We go up to check it out, and I went into our bedroom and saw that my bedside table was in the middle of the room. But the worst and last thing that happened to me was on a Saturday night. I'll never forget this. It still gives me chills when I think about it. We go to bed, everything's normal. We watch a bit of a movie and fall asleep. I wake up facing the wall and glance at the alarm clock. It reads 3:13 a.m. I turned over to go back to sleep and saw my ex standing in the center of the room. Confused, I begin to sit up and ask her what's wrong. But as I start to sit up, I realize my ex is asleep in bed next to me. A surge of fear runs through my core, and I'm frozen to the spot. My eyes adjust, and I just barely make out the figure. It was a young girl in a nightdress with a cartoon character on it, soaking wet, with her head looking down at the floor. I could hear the water droplets landing on the carpet, and I'm just sitting there totally in shock, unable to believe my eyes. After a couple of seconds, her apparition melted away and faded out of sight. I got up and turned on the lights and tried to tell myself that it was just a night terror or something, but the problem with that was that there was a wet patch where she had been standing. We moved out shortly after that. But I can still picture her to this day. Creepiest thing I've ever experienced. I work in a hospital as a nurse. I was on a row of nights, which I dread. I ended up having 5 patients, 2 of which were under care for cancer. There are 2 events in here from 2 separate nights. 1. The night started normally as I assessed and passed meds to the patients and did my charting and other night duties, stocking and other stuff. Just around 11 p.m., one of my palliative patients started ringing, complaining that there was a kid running into the room laughing and playing when they should be in bed. I checked the room to make sure that there was no one in there and reassured him that there were no children in the hospital area where we were. I made him comfortable and left the room. He rang again. I went back to the room to see what he rang for. Agitated, he said that he was just looking to rest comfortably and that people should keep their children under control and not let them jump on his bed playing and laughing. This time, I got the chills, but again, I reassured him that there were no children since it wasn't the pediatric ward. I told him that I would bring him a sleeping pill to help him fall asleep, but that I would be a few minutes. I start walking back toward the desk and medication room to grab the pill. A bell rang. I turned around and saw that the indicator above his door was flashing. Slightly annoyed, I walked back to his room. He was agitated in his bed again, and I asked him what was wrong. He again complained about the kid. He said he was just in there again. I leaned over the bed and calmly explained, "There are no children in this hospital. Look, you need to get some rest." He replied loudly, "He is standing right behind you." I stood up instantly and slowly turned around. Creeped out, I turned to face the patient, and before I could speak, he says, "He ran into the closet," referring to the lockers where patients can store items. I slowly opened the locker and saw that his jacket was swinging, but no one was in there. I turned and told him that there was no one. I rushed into the med room to give him that sleeping pill. 2. This will be a short one. I came out of one of my patients' rooms and was sanitizing my hands, but facing the wall. As I was rubbing my hands together, I noticed the shadow of someone walk out of the room next door, and then walk into the room across from it, as I turned to see. I went into the room where I had seen it go. I asked the patient, who wasn't one of mine, if anyone had come in there. She replied no, but with a shaky voice. I checked the room to make sure that there was indeed no one. I left that room and went into the room where it had came from. I looked around, but again, no one was in there. I checked the patient, who again was not assigned to me, and found that he had died. He was palliative. I walked out of the room immediately to inform the nurse who had the patient that he had died. She asked me to come with her to check the patient because she had been having creepy vibes every time she went in there. I agreed, and we went. She did the assessment where you listen for a full minute. When she was done, we heard knocking on the wall. She said, "See, it's creepy." I didn't think anything of it until she said, "We are on the 4th floor, and on the other side of that wall is the outside of the building." We quickly left the room. 4 of us came in there to shroud the body. So I'm a week out of the hospital after spending 2 weeks in there with COVID-19 and pneumonia. I have a lot of serious health issues, and barely survived my stay, but at the end of my stay, I was woken up at about 4 a.m. by the nurse coming in to give me more antibiotics and change my fluid drip. She left to get a new tube for the drip, and whilst she did that, I rolled over in my bed and saw an elderly man standing at the end of my bed with his hand on the bed at the bottom, as he was looking out the window. Initially, I thought it was one of the elderly gents on the same ward, wandering into my room again. It had happened multiple times, as they all had dementia or delirium, so I spoke to him and asked him if he was alright, but he didn't respond. I buzzed for the nurse and she came back in a rush, and the man vanished before my eyes, and I believe before the nurse's too, as she stopped and stared for a moment, before shaking her head and continuing. I tried asking about it, but she kept telling me that I must be dreaming. Every time she came back into my room, she looked at the same spot where he had been. I'm not sure what I actually did see that night, and I didn't recognize the man at all. One night when I was about 16, I walked outside onto my front porch after an argument with my mom and her husband. After about an hour of pacing and talking myself out of just leaving, The sun was setting, so I turned back and started heading back toward the house. When down the hill, about 150 yards, I see something slowly walking out of the tree line that looks to be a young woman in a dress. But the setting sun is shining off of whatever she's wearing. I don't think it's normal, and I'm a little freaked out, so I run inside and grab my binoculars. I come back, and she's only moved a few feet, walking very slowly, long steps. I focus in, and she's glowing. Gold. And she's dressed like a nun. Again, she was glowing gold. I've never seen her since, and I've spent the last 12 years searching for answers of what I witnessed that day. I work in a place with 5 floors and a basement. It used to be a house for nuns and priests. I have divided the story into small parts describing everything I've seen on each floor. I got called up for a night shift since a colleague called in sick. I've never done a night shift here, so I took up the opportunity to see what it was like. 4th floor. Doing your rounds isn't the creepiest thing at all. The creepiest thing is going down the stairs again. You will see a black figure walking the hallway. Just your average shadow, you know. Well, thing is, the lift sometimes randomly goes to that floor during the night, as if someone is calling it. 3rd floor. Doing your rounds gets a little weirder here, since it seems as though you aren't alone whilst on the floor. You will hear footsteps and see shadows on the wall walking past you. 2nd floor. Exactly the same as 3rd floor except for one painting. It has a woman in it that sometimes changes position or even completely disappears. 1st floor. You will sometimes hear the piano play a D note on the floor above you. Main floor. There is a black leather couch in the hallway where you will sometimes find a see-through man sitting with a cigar and newspaper. He smiles and disappears when you greet him. Basement. The helpful poltergeist resides here. This is the place where before my current company took up the building, the morgue was. There currently are our storage rooms, but the rooms aren't marked with what is in them. But that doesn't matter, because the night shift always gets knocks on the door to indicate where the item is. In 2007, I moved into the house I currently live in. It's over 100 years old, and ever since I can remember there have been weird or creepy things that occur. Recently I've heard noises late at night while I'm in bed. For context, I sleep on the top floor of my house, and it's been getting really creepy. Another thing is that in the hallway we have an attic door that's bolted shut and hasn't been opened by our family or my neighbors who used to live here from what I have been told. I decided to ask my father about it, and he told me that it wasn't a full-size attic, and is more of a crawl space which goes right over my room. And the part that creeps me out the most is that we've never had any animals besides the occasional mouse in our home, which makes me think that what I'm hearing doesn't sound like an animal at all. From as early as I can remember, I used to fall asleep watching old, reel-to-reel black and white cartoons on my wall, like Steamboat Willie. I clearly remember the jittery, shutter-like quality of the cartoon from the old reel-to-reel projector. There was no actual movie projector in my room. At night, I would wake up to someone tapping me on the shoulder. I had a usual routine that I followed when it happened, which involved burying myself under my covers and telling myself that I would count to 7 and then turn over to see what was there. Not sure if there's a significance to 7. To this day, I like to end things with 7. For example, I set my alarm at 6:27 and not 6:30. But anyhow, I would go through the counting routine multiple times. I wanted to see what was there, but I was a kid and didn't really want to see what was there. My mom would tell me that I just needed to confront it and tell it to leave me alone. It took years to build up that courage. I don't remember exactly how long, but I must have been in my early teens before I actually did get the nerve up to turn over right away and tell it to leave me alone and stop tapping me on the shoulder. Once I confronted it, it did stop. Then comes my baby sister when I was 15. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night quite often. Once she was old enough to talk, she said that she was scared of the hand that came up between her wall and the bed and tapped her on the shoulder at night. I am a security officer and I work in a low-volume hospital. I'm sitting in my office on the computer, and to the left of me is a closet door about 3 feet away. It's a small office. Out of nowhere, there are 2 very loud pounding sounds coming from inside the closet. These were full-on banging sounds, not just knocks. It shook the entire office, it was so violent. I jumped what felt like 10 feet out of my chair. It took me a minute to realize what had just happened before I actually looked inside. Of course, nothing was in there, just some old office equipment. I'm kind of in shock now. I've worked here for a year, and have had some odd stuff happen, but I could always find an explanation in my head. This time, I just can't. We've had reports of odd things happening from the housekeeping and other workers. There's a ghost inside of mine and my girlfriend's new home. We've heard stomping in the kitchen in the middle of the night, among lots of other things. The issue that I have is that I wonder why it never shows itself or does anything in my presence. I've come home to doors open, and the animals in the corner shaking. Or I'll hear things in the other room falling, and sure enough, there will be something on the floor, but it never does anything while I'm in the room. My girlfriend, however, has seen the ghost, has had it open doors that she was next to, and heard it whisper. Is my energy off-putting to the ghost, or does my girlfriend attract it through her fear? I do not fear the ghost, and view it as more of an annoyance than anything, whereas she is terrified of it. I was making rounds in the dark hall of the nursing home, mostly to help out with incontinence and bathroom breaks. There's only 1 aide per hall. I went into the room of 2 ladies. One was sound asleep, the other was awake. She had some slight dementia. The curtains are attached to the ceiling for privacy, much like a hospital. I went into her side of the curtains, leaving a small gap open, and told her that I was there to help her. She said, "Okay, but can you please close the curtains all the way? I don't want him to see us." I immediately got goosebumps and asked, "Who?" And she said, "The man right there with the hat." And I followed her pointed finger to the small gap in the curtain that I had left open. I could see that there was a mirror, and in the reflection of that mirror, an empty chair facing us. I immediately closed the curtain and was slightly nervous for the rest of my shift. I'm renting a house currently with some of my friends, and since we moved in this summer, there was an attic door that had a lock on it from our landlord. Well, me and my friend got curious and decided to try and pick the lock. We ended up getting the combination, and when we went up there, I took 3 photos. One is of the front window, one of the back, and one was of an odd postcard on the ground. I sent a photo to a friend, and without me realizing, there was a very clear face in the window with distinct features, eyes, nose, mouth, and head shape. Prior to this, there had been no experiences in the house besides some odd noises. My housemate claims he saw the same face in a different window today after